can you find?
Good everything, Nubians.
Y'all, good everything.
Before we and thank you. Happy New Year's Eve, those of you wherever you are in the world.
Yeah.
So yesterday, I have a contractor in my house like every day.
Yeah.
And so I left because he wasn't there. And I said, I'll be back in 4 minutes. And I got in the house in 4 minutes, and he said, "You're not very African." He said he's from Egypt. He told me I wasn't very African because I was punctual. And I thought
Really?
about that. Yeah. And I was like, Africans have a different way of thinking about time. I don't know if that's
Is he
true. He's Egyptian.
Yeah, but I mean, what kind of Egyptian?
A brown Egyptian? I don't know.
I guess they're all brown. It's funny.
Should I ask him like what kind of Egyptian should he be? Like
just ask where he's from. I mean, I'm saying because just about everybody, I won't say everybody, but the overwhelming majority of people in Egypt, if they came here, kept their mouth shut, would be with us. It's not even like most things. But when you see the Nubians, you know the Nubians immediately because they literally look like us. Like when we get to Aswan, Aswan is Nubia. So Elephantine Island, all those people, they're Africans. When we go to Luxor, it's more of a mix, but those people more kind of browner skin. You go to Cairo, it's everybody, obviously. And a lot of Arabs. Now, of course, Arabs, it's a real question because not the same, but at least in a similar kind of ballpark as those who would say Jews are a distinct mix of ethnicities. Shout out to Whoopi Goldberg for getting in trouble. Anyway, because you can't talk about this. Right, exactly. We can sip at that point. When I say that because in the Sudan, which is now Sudan and South Sudan, but in Sudan now, we would call Sudan now because it's two countries where from Khartoum going toward Egypt, those people are Africans, but they would say they are Arabs. And the question is, why would you call yourself Arab? Well, I speak Arabic. I'm a Muslim. It's a culture.
That's why I brought it up because.
Yeah. So I'm just saying your contractor, if he were home.
What would he call himself?
He might call himself African at the World Cup, but when he get home, how do you treat the Nubians? That's my.
Oh, well, no, he's completely, into Nubian culture.
Oh, well, in that case, then yeah.
Egypt. So but my question, because this whole journey is not even this year because we can't even break things up. Even the notion of a new year being January 1st is very not us. Right. It's not correct. Right. Christmas, Jesus' birthday, not correct. Right. All of these things, are woven into a power structure to make people comply. So I'm, we are breaking free from that, but at the same time, we have to remember. So I'm asking a fundamental question because there are a lot of Nubians right now who are like, if we come in 5 minutes late, they're harassing Ahmad. He's like, so what time? I said, put ish at the end.
Shout out Ahmad because I was looking for my
8:30-ish, ish.
Brother. Because I was looking for my copy of the Times with New York Times with Pele's obituary, but we're going to talk about Edison.
Yeah, Pele, everybody. But it's like we are on the clock because of having to get up to feel, to pick cotton and stuff, right? So there's a clock, there's a bell, there's a clock, there's a bell, and everything is very like we have to get up and do something. And if we don't do it at that time, then there's a punishment. Maybe there's a lash. Maybe we get fired. Maybe we get fined. Maybe there's docking of pay. We are conditioned like Pavlov's dogs.
No question.
To even have alarm clock. I don't have an alarm clock. Full disclosure, I get up when I get up.
Me neither.
I cannot do that to myself. But,
me neither.
But there are people that have to get up and can't get up, and they need an alarm clock. But it's all of that is still conditioning. So I'm just, as we move into this next spin of the wheel, I'd like to spend all of us to spend more time in our bodies, in our spirits, in our minds, and ourselves, and really start to contemplate who we really are in this power structure, who we really are in our community. Do we line up our words? Because it's not just about I'm gonna be here at a certain time. What does that mean? Like we all need to be in agreement with what that means. But also it's about like we're gonna gather around this time. we'll get here because Dr. Carr and I'm not rushing the conversations we had before this because they're precious to me. I don't get a lot of time to talk.
Same here.
So
Same.
I'm like, y'all gonna wait a few minutes.
Same.
I'm sorry. We gotta catch up. But yeah, no, but I'm really contemplating, like, what does it mean to be here? Why are we here? What does it mean to be in this community? What does it mean to be in community? And what is our contribution to that? And how do we treat each other? How do we speak?
What does it mean to be in community? What does it mean to be in community? Where would we look for clues as to answer that question?
Until I met you, I had an edict by which I lived, and it's weird, because most of us don't run into people who actually really care about people. So we're always like the trust building. Like, I had to, engender trust with you.
All of us, same here. No question. Same here.
Like there's a trust that we distrust each other, but it's inherent and it's conditioned in 400 years of like betrayal, not even at our own, behest. We're not betraying because we're betraying to live. It's not like we want to betray, but then at what point does the habit become the condition? At what point does the habit become the condition? So I think about this because I know several people who are in media right now that I know personally that, they made a bargain. In their minds, they tell themselves, I'm doing this, because I'm gonna get us there, like I'm playing the game. I'm just playing the game. But then you are still playing the game. Okay, you got 12 million. I started watching the Deion Sanders documentary last night. He's one of the
Prime. Shout out to Coach Prime, my man, Coach Prime. Thank you, Coach. You had no idea you were going to be so helpful to us, and so I wish you all the best. I hope you have a hell of a coaching staff, because when they find out that you ain't no X's and O's coach, been exposed by the HBCUs the last few years on that tip, hopefully you'll be able to overcome that. I think you will, because you've recruited a hell of a talent. But how is Coach Prime? Oh wait, so they made this after he went to Colorado. That's fascinating how quickly they got together. And wait, they didn't?
No. And it's Rock. The Rock is in the whole thing's done. And so and it's interesting because the Rock came out. There's the XFL. I mean, it's a whole thing, and it is beautiful. For those of us who aren't in community, it looks all of the things, and all of the words are just so beautiful. And I'm not even thinking about Deion Sanders when I'm saying this. Yeah. There's a particular person I'm thinking about. But I'm like, at what point is the game playing you, and you no longer know that, I'm just playing the game. I'm just playing the game. Okay. All right. So now 10 million, 12 million, you got your house, you got everything. Okay. So you still doing this? Now it's you, right? Because if you do something over and over again, it's no longer a habit. It becomes who you are.
It's
you can't
the last poet said, is it in New York, the Big Apple? Talks about a brother. One of the lines talks about a brother being on the subway, and it said, "Here's a brother being sucked in by all that S on the wall." In other words, if you stay there long enough, or as Malala Karinga says often, I've heard him say this many times, if you live in a whorehouse, and I'm not using whore in a gendered sense, it could be women or men. But if you live in a house of ill repute, prostitution, people, sex workers, sex trade, I won't even put a moral judgment on it. But Karinga said, if you live in that house, sooner or later, you're going to pull your money out. The whole point being the context is very important. I mean, even people want to do different. Like, we had to engender trust, no question. But we didn't start the same place that strangers start, because Ajwa brought me up there, and
the entry. That's right.
Ajwa. So therefore, I think a one key to building community is relationships. If somebody came to you and said, "I don't know you," yeah, but I know so and so. Really? So you check with so and so and said,
that's true.
Okay, yeah. I mean, that's the step. Now, it doesn't get us there, but it gets us at the. Now, what we've been doing these last couple of years, several years, and I'm so excited for 23 as we just continue. We're building relationships. People can trust. That thing is every Monday night, but this past Monday night was just when the young brother came in.
I reached out to him because excellent. I had to, because I'm like, oh, he's special.
Now it's special.
Yeah.
And it took us back last year when Sister Lisa Latouche, who is of course a tap dancer and practitioner and teacher, born and raised in Canada, and then just tying it all together. But no, so yeah, I mean, how we build community, and how, you know, it's funny in terms of time. You mentioned that one, of course, the best books that opened us up to a relationship to the brother who came in and had a conversation with all of us in Nubia, Howard French, Born in Blackness, which we won't put in 2022 because it came out in 2021. But of course, Howard talks about Barbados and how this mentality, the Dutch, then the English, everybody who enslaved us, but really starting out with those early enslavers who experimented on how to extract the greatest amount of labor wealth from us. Everything was, they attempted to reduce everything to numbers. X number of sugarcane stalks cut, X number of cotton balls picked, X number of export rum made. How long did it take? Okay, what's the average age this person can work at this age before they collapse and die? And how many boats we got to bring in every month to keep this labor? And we're going to take records. That's why the archive is so full with ledgers, because they literally did that. And so it reminds me of two things. My friend Dana King, who did curriculum work and ran social studies and African American studies for the schools of Philadelphia, when we developed the curriculum frame, she used to laugh and say, when we would get together and be together for hours working through curriculum, thinking, and she said, "Now see, y'all came over my house. We supposed to be here at noon. Y'all come stumbling in 1, 2 o'clock. Now 7, 8 o'clock. We didn't sit, but we got the work done because it couldn't start till everybody was there." And she said, it reminds me of the joke I once heard a Continental African tell me, say, when white people showed up in Africa and black people started talking with them, and then they said, you know, what is their concept of God? The Africans talking to each other. So what is their concept of God? One African looked at the other African and pointed at the clock and said, that's their God. Their God is the clock. They do things based on where that little hand goes. That's when you see them show up. They all looking at that little hand. And the other story reminds me of is my dear friend, master teacher, CEO and principal of Sankofa Freedom Academy, our freedom school in Philadelphia, Aisha Imani. When she was a teacher at William Penn High School in North Philly, and I used to go down there when I was a graduate student at Temple, and I would go down there once a week to teach African American history. And that's when I got to know Aisha many years ago. This is in the early 90s. So at any rate, the bell would ring in William Penn. And those of you from Philly know the old William Penn High School no longer there. Temple made it a practice football field, you know, gentrification. But I'm glad they knocked that place down because it looked like a prison. They built it that way. It's that kind of brutalist style that was in the 70s, 80s. And so not a lot of closed spaces, those open spaces where you can put the dividers up and move things around, you know. The bell would ring, and Aisha was in charge of a small learning community. That was when they were experimenting with small learning communities called masterminds, culturally based. She's a mathematician by training, just a brilliant sister. But at any rate, the bell would ring, and invariably, the other students who were coming from the other classes would have to wait because the students in masterminds would still be in some deep conversation. Aisha got them doing. I said, we sit there, and then they would always be late going to their next class. This is why I'm going with this. Here's the point of it. It raises this question as you talking about time, and we're talking about relationships, how do you build community? So they would come, say, it's time, it's time, it's time. Dr. Imani now, Mama Aisha, she put her hand up and said, oh, we are not dogs. She said, we do not respond to bells. We respond to each other. And so finish your point, sister. And then we finish your point. Okay, that's what we'll pick up tomorrow. And then the students would get up. They had rehumanized themselves. We don't respond to bells. Because if you notice, like in school, the bell ring, no matter what's going on. And then I said, ring. Okay. She said, we don't respond to bells. That clock is not our God. We value each other. And so, and what that does, so yeah, okay, 8 o'clock, no problem. 8:10, 8:09, we didn't start on time. Is that your God? Your God, the clock? Or do we know each other? Who are we to each other? All of these things found their way into that curriculum over the years. Who are we to each other? The relationship. That's what it is.
We've been taught and conditioned that, you know, if you're late, you're disrespectful. You know, it's like, all right, some people are really egregious and they use that as a
now that's true.
As a power. You know, it's like if you don't have power in your own life, you're gonna stall other people's. But you know, like, you know, if you're on time, you're late, you know, like that whole mentality about the corporate beast. And you know, for those of us that need to succeed in those spaces, we have to show up on time, you know. But
Unless
we're
we have the kind of power where we don't.
Hmm?
Unless we have the kind of power where we don't.
Right.
In other words, you got to dress for success. Unless you Elon Musk, where you can show up looking like you just finished working on your car. I mean, this is all about power at the end of the day, right? And so let's be very clear. The way we were treated by those who enslaved us was the way they were treating each other. This whole in fact, there's a book called Thinking in Time. I'll never be able to find it. It's probably in storage. But the whole book is about.
Hold on, I'm writing it down.
Yeah, in fact, somebody, I'm pulling up the app now. Somebody look and see. If Laura's in here, she'll do it because she, among many others. I mean, Thinking in Time. It's I may be conflating it with another book that's on how warfare. Oh, anyway, but the point is this whole notion of European cultural logics. And I'm not saying that these authors are saying specifically Europeans and excluding other people. I'm saying that the obsession of Europeans with themselves means that most of the stuff that's written is anchored in their experiences. So when they turn around and say, see, why are y'all saying this? This is it's never global. It's never global. Braudel writing the history of the Mediterranean world, Gibbon, Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire. Y'all always think of yourselves, no problem. But what you're not going to do is act like the rest of the world is organized around your logics. But in these two books I'm thinking about, Thinking in Time being one, the whole idea is how are these cultures that come out of Western Eurasia or Europe, how are so many of them oriented around precision of movement and precision of time? So when people say you're disrespecting my time because you're not here on time, well, what time got to do with our relationship? And even all the Europeans aren't the same. The closer you get to, and by the way, Sheikh Anta Diop, of course, born 1923, December 29th, his birthday's day for yesterday. He talks about what he calls zones of confluence. He says the closer you get to the equator, the difference you see in the cultures. He said the English, the Irish, the Swedes, they are not the Italians. They are not the Spanish. They are not the Sicilians. The closer you get to that equator, the less you see this rigid kind of compartmentalized, shrunken notion of how you move through the world. Hey, we're going to take a nap in Spain. We don't do that in England. Yeah, because it's cold as hell up here. Y'all boom, boom, boom. The environment has shaped the way you deal with culture. But I'm saying all that to say that in Thinking in Time or others, they would say everything from military precision, marching in time and movement, all this is the difference between a core style band at Ohio State and the Ocean of Soul at Texas Southern. It's going to be precise, but we're going to have a little movement in it. We're going to do this a little bit. And we talked about that Monday night, of course, when we talk about cultural meaning making and Robert Ferris Thompson. We have to be mindful of the fact that it is unnatural for human beings to respond to artificial rhythms. The sun is up every day. The sun is precise as hell. But guess what? You don't need an alarm clock if you can wean yourself from that artificial machine. Because your body will respond to the sun unless you stayed up all night. In other words, the rhythms are as precise as they can get in nature. And we knew that, and we know that. You know what I'm saying? So, I mean, don't even, when you tell that man, I'm going to be back in 4 minutes. Okay.
And I was so proud that I did it. And I was, yes.
Yeah, because there is a calibration. There is a calibration. The question is it always necessary? Because I mean, in other words, let me ask you, what was the meaning you were communicating to this other human being by saying that?
Well, he operates in a so we've had this has been a back and forth. So he'll say, I'll be there in 30 minutes and it'll be an hour. And so like I was like, if you tell me 30 minutes, it's got to be 30 minutes, or I'm gonna leave. Right. So it's been kind of like the thing. So when I said 4 minutes, I had to be there 4 minutes because I've been like very. And he was like, so he finally was like, that's not very African of you. I was like,
oh, I see. You know, was he raised? Do you know if he was raised in Egypt?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. He still struggles with the language here. It's like,
all right. No reason I asked because, you know, when anybody who has been there and everybody who's going for the first time coming up in August this coming year, you know, there are miles and miles of miles, and we see this other place in the world, of unfinished buildings with people living in them. You know what I'm saying? I know you've seen that. You know,
wait a minute. Let me find out.
But no, I mean unfinished. I mean like the concrete, and that's it. And then you see laundry hanging up, stretching between them. Because people get money they add on. You don't have enough money. Once you got the structure up, and see, it doesn't rain there, and it doesn't get intemperate in terms of climate, so you manage, and then you get a little bit more money. The families live together. We don't have some mom, okay, and so you build. I'm saying all that to say that construction projects, unless they are heavily subsidized from the beginning, and right now, Sisi, the ruler of Egypt, for lack of a better term, with millions of our tax dollars and others, he's building whole cities. Like they done wiped out over there by what they used to call in ancient Kemet own Heliopolis now. The other name will come to me in a minute. Between Cairo and the airport, they building all this stuff, but they got the money. They trying to bring tourism back. They doing all this stuff. I'm saying those buildings gonna go up fast, but if you don't have money, you go a little at a time. So the idea that somebody who does contract work, who is an Egyptian, you know what I'm saying? The idea that we will get it done means something different in a society where people don't have money like that. You know what I'm saying? So they may look at him and say, dude, you're busting your ass. Wait a minute. It only took you an hour to get back? Yeah, man. Sometimes they come back 2 weeks. You know, we ain't got the money. But see, wait, you have money? Yeah. And you got this expectation? Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna work with you. I'm gonna work with you. And then it's like, I gotta, and then you're resetting his clock.
Yeah. And no, and you know what he did for me is, you know, because I'm constantly thinking about ways in which colonized mentality, you know, rules my life, and just eradicating that little by little, and just, you know, and I may come back because I'm, you know, a very kind of organized person. I think a certain kind of way, but I'm always cool. Yeah, why do I think this way? You know, is this because I'm naturally, you know, or have I been conditioned? And if it's conditioning, is it good or is it bad? Like we should have these assessments. And so he just made me sit for a minute. I still think there's value in showing up when you say you're going to show up. Doing the things you say you're going to do.
That's right.
You know, but this thing that I'm going to lean into this year, grace in relationship, right? Because the relationship, and I said this to him, the relationship that we have is way more important than whatever work. Because we have these deep esoteric. I mean, we talk, you know, and it's beautiful to be able to have these conversations about not just construction but life and Africa. I'm learning about Africa through his lens, how he's treated, you know, by people who may not know. They may mistake him for Hispanic or something, and the things you say around him. He's raising really radical children who, you know, are not having it, you know, and it's wonderful, you know, having conversations with him. So I'm like, the relationship's way, so now we can rib each other. We can gently know, you know, so now it's fun. But, you know, even that, you know, is so important that we give each other grace. If the relationship is worth it, you know, if the value is there. And that's something we have to assess too. So,
well, that's why I asked you, and that was there's the answer. Yeah. You're giving him those things because as human beings, y'all are building a relationship. And that grace is folded into this larger desire. I mean, here we are, the 31st, 6th day of Kwanzaa, Kuumba. Yesterday, of course, was Nia, purpose. Yeah, there's a purpose to that. I want a relationship with you. I want you to have a relationship with me. I want a relationship with you too. I say, it's not very African to you. Okay, I'll be back in 4 minutes. I mean, it's language, but underneath that is something very different. That's a way of knowing. We have a relationship. I'm not mad, but I want you to do this. Okay, well, I want to do that too, but I'm not used to doing that. Okay, well, I want you to do this. Well, I'm not used to doing that, but we're going to work through this. That's a beautiful thing. Now, if we're listening to that with a different cultural anchor, we hear something different. She mad. She telling him that because no. What's my purpose? I have a relationship with it.
You know, I know we none of this was something we were going to talk about because a lot of answers.
Don't worry, it's getting there because grace is very prevalent. Grace is very. We gave a lot of grace to Benedict the Sixth, I think. Pope. No,
did we? Who gave him grace? And you told me you said he died. I was like, I thought he'd been done dead.
Yeah, well, Joseph Aloysius Ratzinger, also known as Pope Benedict the 16th. In 1941 and 1942. Come on back. I'm just mentioning that he participated in the Hitler Youth. He was a member of the Hitler Youth. Now, the excuses that were given once he was being vetted as Pope was that, and the Simon Rosenthal Center did a search of his background. Well, everybody was in the Hitler Youth. That's not true. There were some hardcore Catholics who did not join the Hitler Youth, but he was not a Nazi. He was a teenager in Germany. You know what I'm saying? And they say, well, there's some evidence that his family, you know, was anti-Nazi. Okay, no problem. Well, how could he still be the Pope? Oh, you gave him grace. Let's see. So do we get grace? No, you know what? Hold on now. Grace is for human beings. Y'all not human. So we're gonna go back through your whole life. And if you were 3 years old and belched and we smelled something on your breath that smelled like perhaps adjacent to marijuana, you cannot be on this. Well, yeah, my man's over here can fall out dead ass drunk, and you call the FBI and tell him really don't go too hard on this, and he could be a whole Supreme Court justice. Shout out to all the party goers who've been with white supremacists over the last month, including Justice Kavanaugh. But my point is, grace is reserved for people who see people's humanity. Pope Benedict XVI, now passed away a couple of hours ago, got grace from some people because he still got to be the Pope, even though he was dead ass in the Hitler Youth in 1941 and 42. If memory serves me correctly, there was a whole war going on at the time. But at any rate, so when you say grace, yeah, grace is a funny thing. In order to have grace, you must first want to extend grace to another person, right?
You know, I was a teenager. I remember being conscious and knowing stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Right and wrong, and you know, injustice, inhumanity. I remember being a teenager. I remember being a 10-year-old, recognizing, you know, watching and reading Roots that something was wrong. You know, like I don't think that's an excuse,
right?
That he was a teenager, because he
knew.
What
you don't think?
No, I mean, every German knew when the dust was in the air what was happening. They knew that was bodies being incinerated, right? They knew that all of the Jewish people disappeared. They knew that. They knew that, right? They did know that they were rounded up. They knew about Kristallnacht, right? Because that happened 10 years before. They knew, right? So you in the Hitler Youth, you know what the mission is when they talk about the Aryan race and the master race and all that. You know, they knew, and the Kyle Rittenhouse knew what he was doing, right? When he went.
Oh, well, Kyle Rittenhouse.
I mean, he knew, right? It's like he was a teenager, but somehow, you know, Tamir Rice doesn't get grace, but he, you know, he can cry bullet tears, and you know, like it's and the little boy that was just recently killed by this man got out of his car and shot him
in Columbus, Ohio, and walking the streets. In fact, Roland's on vacation, but she came on Roland Martin and Phil, his mother. That little boy got killed, and this man not only wasn't charged yet by the DA in Columbus, they haven't brought it to the grand jury. He already had he's not supposed to be in possession of a gun. He already had
domestic violence case, right?
Yes, probation, and his mama told us this man not only still walking free, he walking around the same apartment complex, talking stuff, posting stuff on social media. I know exactly where that is. I lived in Columbus for 5 years, Ohio. Yeah, right there, Southwest Columbus. He's in that apartment complex, walking around as we hear right now. Now, what would you do?
But we're violent people because, you know, if we were truly all the things that people say we are,
wouldn't be walking around.
George Zimmerman, a whole bunch of people would be walking around. I'm just saying, like, if we were all of those things, which we're not.
Craig Butler, the young brother's name was Sine Reed. That's right, young Sine Reed. Yeah, Craig Butler's still walking around. And you know what? That's interesting. Seth Robinson talks about that. You know, why didn't we just kill everybody? That's a cultural grounding as well. Now, in this situation, what do we do, Professor Hunter? Because this is the same attitude that would tell us to tell people this is the greatest country in the world, United States, and we should. This man straight up killed a child, and he is walking around, and y'all won't charge him. So tomorrow or February or in July, when something else happens, we burn the whole city of Columbus down. You gonna bring a camera out here and say this? That didn't happen then. That happened when Sine Reed was murdered.
Right. Ooh.
You know what I'm saying? People don't understand that. I mean, Kwanzaa is so funny how everybody's adopting Kwanzaa now. And I think Keith Mays has written it.
There's a whole Hallmark shout out to Hollywood. She got a Hallmark show around Kwanzaa. I was like, going through Hallmark.
Was that Holly Robinson Pete?
Yes.
Yeah, because I saw her in the kente cloth dress, everything immaculate. I'm like, yeah. In fact, I resisted the urge. I know somewhere around here in this library, I got a copy of the Rugrats Kwanzaa. But it's somewhere around here. And I remember about a couple of months ago, I said I should put this aside, and I didn't do it. But the point is that
you even buy that though.
Oh no, because I mean, look, if I got two nickels to rub together, I'll probably take them both.
Wait, now you got me Googled the Rugrats Kwanzaa.
Rugrats Kwanzaa. Yeah, in fact, I wish I had pulled it. Anyway, I can show it anytime. But
okay.
But, I mean, but it's not unusual. And the whole thing is, you know.
Wait, there's more than one. They got the first Kwanzaa.
Oh yeah. Hey, it's money to be made. This is what I'm saying. But here's the thing: That is not Ujamaa. That is not cooperative economics. At the core of that principle, the third principle of Kwanzaa, after unity, umoja, after Kujitalia, self-determination, after Ujima, collective work and responsibility, you got Ujamaa, cooperative economics. Cooperative economics does not mean black capitalism in the sense that I got money, so this is Ujamaa. No, collective. So they're gonna make Rugrats Kwanzaa books. There's gonna be a Hallmark movie. There was a recent posting that showed Barack Obama said, see, Obama is an example of Imani. He had faith that he could be president. No. Kwanzaa comes out of a moment in the 1960s where there's a global revolt against oppression, whether it be hyper-capitalism and the oppressed, whether it be colonialism all over the globe. Here in the United States, whether it be the human rights movement that has been going on since we were snatched, but then intensified in the 20th century, particularly the second half in the 1950s and 60s, that has been narrated by the social structure here in the United States as the so-called civil rights movement. Others have called it the long freedom movement. People will call it the liberation struggle, the black liberation struggle in the United States, connected to those other ones. But out of that came a number of expressions of self-determination. And that doesn't mean that within those governance formations, who we are to each other, there weren't tensions, there weren't cleavages, there weren't real battles, there weren't all kinds of things. But the thing that held them all together was a sense that there is a purpose. We are fighting for the same thing, our complete human liberation. And as we achieve that, then we want that for others, but we want it for ourselves first, because we've never had it here. We were brought into this criminal enterprise. I'm saying all that to say that the principles of Kwanzaa were born out of this determination that it's not about you as an individual. It's about you and me and everybody else forming relationships and being a collective. So I'm saying all that to say that, of course, there are market-driven Kwanzaa products now. And there are many people of African descent and others, but particularly of African descent, who are able now to embrace Kwanzaa and embrace those values very publicly, because the market has found material value in that. And they can cosplay this about something else, but it's really about the fact that you can't stop it, you see. So with that in mind, we then have to balance what good we can get out of that. So, I mean, I would ask you, I mean, this work of recovery that we have undertaken on a day, the 31st of December, when we think about that principle of Kwanzaa, of creativity, at the core of that principle, in fact, let me just pull up, I'm sure, one of my many Kwanzaa books. And we'll talk a little bit about this in a moment, a little bit more in a moment. But I want to ask you, here we are, Kuumba, to do as much as we can in the way that we can to leave our community more beautiful and beneficial than we inherited it. Now, the literal interpretation would be a physical community, but we're really talking much bigger than that. We're talking about our relationships, our community. How can we leave them more beautiful than what we inherited there? Will a Hallmark movie do that? Yeah, probably. Even if it's unintended. Why? Because somebody will see that, see these people in African clothes, and say, it's the most natural thing in the world. Now, will African clothes lead us to liberation? No. It's some people with the best African clothes in the world who are some of the worst oppressors of their own people in the world. I mean, Joseph Mobutu Sese Seko, that stooge who was implanted by the Belgians and with the assent of the UN and with the United States of America, shout out to John Kennedy and blowback. But Mobutu Sese Seko said this will no longer be the Congo. We're going to call it Zaire, because he had something called, he advanced in the 1950s and 60s, particularly 60s after he had well, the 60s, 61, 62, after they eliminated Patrice Lumumba, called authenticity. We'll be authentically African. He had his leopard skin hat. He had his staff, you know, he had his African inspired dress and, you know, riff on that, and was one of the most brutal anti-human dictators in the 20th century. After the murder of Patrice Lumumba, damn Cook rose up to command in the army. Joseph Mobutu Sese Seko. He says, I'm not going to use Joseph anymore. I'm African. Okay, the cultural gloss ain't going to save us. Is it better to have a culture than not? depends on what we're talking about. People now in the United States, for example, we talk about for the culture. I don't even know what that means. And I absolutely know what that means. It means nothing. And it also means something that can't be fully articulated. You just basically talk, it's almost like a demographic term. But Mobutu is a great example of someone who embraces this idea of African culture and then uses the culture as a weapon. Now, meanwhile, the Africans who are farthest away from this, particularly when we don't study and are not aware, there are many Africans around the world who protested that. John Clark, Carlos Moore, so many others, Maya Angelou, so many others went to the United Nations after Lumumba was assassinated in New York City and protested, got thrown out of the meetings, all this kind of stuff. Carlos Moore still tells those stories. But at any rate, Mobutu comes in and Zaire becomes the host country for, of course, the Ali Foreman fight, as we were talking about with, you know, last week, talking about Ali Foreman fighting there, the Spinners and Bill Withers and Celia Cruz, and I mean, so many others, James Brown, B.B. King coming and performing there, you know, Ali knocks Foreman out. But the guy who made that possible is a straight dictator plant by the United States of America and by the former colonial power Belgium. All of them did that. So I mean, it gets very complicated. And then of course, somebody who's been here, we celebrate Ralph Bunche. And I'll end with this on this topic. Ralph Bunche goes in when Patrice Lumumba is in trouble, because Lumumba, in that Pan-Africanist move, Lumumba, Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana, Nnamdi Azikiwe in Nigeria, and I'm only using these names as shorthands, which I think we should talk about in a moment. These questions of icons, what do individuals represent? They're trying to come together and overthrow oppression. Well, Eisenhower and then Kennedy and them, the United States, they want Lumumba on their side. On the other side, you got the Russians and the Chinese. They want Lumumba on their side. Lumumba's caught, and so the United Nations, which is a tool then of the United States, still in this way, in many ways today, they try to call themselves negotiating. Ralph Bunche is sent, because remember, Ralph Bunche ends up being a negotiator working with the UN. Ralph Bunche gets the Nobel Prize for negotiating the creation of what becomes the state of Israel. Not a proud moment if you look at what just happened a couple of days ago, Bibi Netanyahu and this right-wing government in Israel. But anyway, I'm saying all that. Ralph Bunche, who we in the United States of America as African people say, oh, Ralph Bunche is, you know, he was brilliant, worked at Howard University, He shows up in Congo. You know what Lumumba tells him? Y'all need to send me somebody to negotiate with. I know the Negro don't have no power. If I see the Negro, no, send me somebody. No, I mean, it boggles the mind how close all of this is for us to study, to understand. So when we see it again, we don't fall for the same trap.
But we're doing it, right? So
yes, we're doing it. Yes.
So people showed up and validated Mobutu, right?
Yes.
You know, by showing up, by having the fight there.
That's right.
In our ignorance, you know, we think we're doing something very African to support Africa.
That's right.
We're actually supporting oppression. And we do it even now with how we support music and people in our culture who are doing destructive things in our community. We support, and we're out there at courthouses, you know, fighting for their freedom with the hashtag, even though I've been thinking, okay.
No, let's keep going. And I'm loving it because as we're talking, I'm looking in the chat, and if y'all are watching this later on YouTube, we got Kiswahili speakers like Nduku, who is helping to translate these Kiswahili terms, because some of the terms in Kwanzaa, all the terms Kiswahili in terms of the principles, but some of them are more loosely translated than others. So this is, and I'm talking about this in the context of where we're going and where we've been and where we're going as we go forward in this work. It is really the collective that is making meaning. So thank you for that. Folks are dropping in footnotes and extending on. Yes, Lord. James Brown. Thank you, C. Anthony. James Brown, Soul Power, live in Kinshasa, Zaire. Yeah, because you know that film, and he put the YouTube link in. So we see James Brown come out there with that belt buckle that says GFOS, Godfather of Soul, Soul Power. How could I forget? Miriam Makeba performs. I mean, all of that stuff's on tape. So y'all put, yep. Oh yeah, Ralph Bunche helped negotiate the formation of the state of Israel. That's why he got the Nobel Prize, which he said, I cannot accept this Nobel Prize by myself. It was a team. But guess what? Everybody has the right to self-determination. Now, do you have the right to displace the people who were there before? It's a very good book called Black Power and Palestine that talks about that. And it's and we're going to talk about some of those things. So I'm bringing some of the other things for this morning. But This is Ralph would have stepped out of this if he knew where it was going. Cookie, I tend to agree with you, because Ralph Bunche was one of those people. If you go back to his earlier days, a generation before him, he was a young scholar. This man out of Detroit, then UCLA, comes work at Howard. He's considered one of the young radicals. There's a book called Born Along the Color Line by a cat named Miller that writes about Ralph Bunche and these cats when they go to the Armenia conference. I won't get too deep into this. I won't go too far off on this, but actually, let me put this in the context of this conversation we've started today, because really today, here we are, the last day of the so-called calendar year. And Prof, you've opened us up to have this conversation about community. What does it mean? About grace. How do we extend it? Who is we and how do we build? This is what we've been doing all along. And as we think about this vision coming forward in 2023, the momentum we have really is so much anchored in strengthening and growing this collective by sharing and participating. That's why I paused and noted the chat for a moment. And why, you know, in the YouTube dimension of this particular effort, you know, I've been reading the comments and now started to reply to comments because it is so rich. And we'll come back to that in a minute as well. But this notion of strengthening and growing a collective, this question of community, what does it mean? This question of building relationships. When we think about it in the context of just these things we've opened up with today, then when you look at people attempting to liberate themselves, we might have differences of opinion as to where that might look and what that might look like at any one given moment. And then over the arc of our lives, our opinions will change. So a Ralph Bunche, who is rejected by, you know, one of the leaders of the African independence movement, who was in that time Prime Minister of Congo, Patrice Lumumba, because Lumumba is desperate for attempting to maintain this autonomy and not get caught up in the emerging Cold War struggle. And he sees Bunche as representative of that. This same Ralph Bunche, who a few years before, had a little bit over a decade before, had helped negotiate the formation of the state now known as Israel, a very important moment in contemporary global history, with people who themselves have been persecuted and who are looking for a place where they will no longer be attacked, a completely legitimate idea, but one with its own fraught with its own contradictions and tensions. Zionism in some places, settler colonialism in other places, displacing. And here's Bunche again in the center of this, arguing for self-determination, but also arguing for the common humanity that should not lead to the displacement of other people. And while Bunche negotiates that in 1947, Israel comes into existence. 20 years later, you got the 7-Day War. And you got the entire Arab world and many other people against the idea that you're going to displace these people who are Palestinians. They were there. And technically, if you're looking at it as a linguistic formation, so-called Afro-Asian languages, Arabic and Hebrew share root Semitic. So when you say anti-Semitic, are you saying anti-Jewish? Because you against those Arabs, and you want to drive them into the sea. They want to drive you into the sea. Some people want to coexist, but this is a fraught mess. Ralph Bunche is there at the formation of that, as these people who have been displaced in part because they have been slaughtered in Germany. And they were not alone. They were the vast majority, but they were not alone. When you read Firpo Carr, F-I-R-P-O, Carr, C-A-R-R, no relation. But he wrote a book called Hitler's Black Victims. My friend and brother Clarence Luzane wrote a book on this subject. There were Black people who were killed in the Holocaust. They were against Black people. It was one Black man in an interracial relationship, Ernest Everett Just, who won the Spingarn Medal in NAACP, one of the greatest scientists of the 20th century, stem cell biologist. He got caught. When you read Kenneth Manning's book, Black Apollo of Science, you see that this is a Black man from South Carolina, went to Dartmouth undergrad, had a PhD, taught at Howard for years, brilliant scientist, pioneer scientist, who was in Germany at the time and gets put in a concentration camp and escapes and gets out of Germany before he is slaughtered. There's a whole group of people known collectively as the Roma, R-O-M-A. We know them because the slur that we were taught as children that we refer to them at often as gypsies. They were slaughtered. But there were a lot of people who were Jewish who were slaughtered by the millions. One of them Well, let me not pause here because I'm not even going to bring Santos of New York in. He'll come in a little bit later. Not Jew-ish ish. No, Jews slaughtered. And so looking for a homeland, you read Robert Weisberg's book. I'm pointing back here like I could pull the book now. African Zion. You'll see there were many different places proposed for the place to settle these folk. But because the British had colonial fingers on Palestine, and the criminal enterprise known as Western colonialism, this several centuries at that time, they got a place they can put these people. In some people's mind, dump these people. These are not friends of Jewish people, but no problem. And the UN helps. And so this creates this animosity and this tension, which continues to this day. Ralph Bunche is in the middle of that. But a generation before, I think it was 1933. So 47, 37, 15 years, 14 years before. Bunche, a young political scientist, Emmett Dorsey, Charles Hamilton Houston, so many others, Joel Spingarn invites these young people and some elders, James Weldon Johnson, W.E.B. Du Bois, others, to his stately retreat in Amenia, New York, the Amenia Conference. And no. Yeah, they had two Amenia Conference, second Amenia Conference. Anyway, to talk about race and problems and how we create better human relations. Now, mind you, W.E.B. Du Bois, a founder of the NAACP, and even now in this generation, we would say, well, colored people, we need to change that. Well, one of the reasons Du Bois suggested, Du Bois was the one who kind of led that conversation in terms of suggesting using colored people. Why do you use colored people instead of Negroes? He said, because colored people is the more inclusive term. Du Bois wasn't thinking colored people in terms of Black Americans. Du Bois was thinking non-white people. See, Du Bois, at the beginning of the NAACP, he wasn't thinking about the United States by itself. He said, the world is majority non-white. This could be the National Association, which means you think U.S., for the advancement of, okay, Negro American, let's say colored people. Why? I'm putting a seed in there for a later age. You know what I'm saying? But all these people come to Amenia. In 1932, 33, Du Bois, 68, 78, 88, 98, 08, 18, 28. He's 65, 64 years old. He was born in February 23rd, 1868. So he's considered an old man. Bunche of them boys, they're younger. They are impatient. Bunche is deeply steeped in, very much aware of, and very sympathetic to many of the ideas that might be associated with the communists, certainly the socialists. Emmett Dorsey and them, they coming up like, what the hell's going on, young people? Man, you old people moving too slow, man. The old man, and they battling Du Bois on this. A generation later, Bunche has been pulled into the criminal enterprise differently. And although he is a lifelong fighter for human rights, he gets pulled into the criminal enterprise of these Europeans. And those they want to exploit, those they want to assist for something other than humanitarian reasons, and those they don't give a damn about. And so I agree with you. I think if he had looked later, he might have changed his attitude. So, yeah, I'm just looking at the chat a little bit. All right, so let's pause. Now that we've been in for about 50 minutes. How do we strengthen and grow this collective sharing that we have built, and Prof, having pioneered this, having been the center and anchor for this, and for those of you who aren't part yet of the convening that we have in Narrative in Nubia, it's critical that we share this, that you understand that this is founded and grounded in sharing and participating. And I don't mean, and I agree, and thank you all, because I see it. Azakia and others, he does get pulled in. That doesn't mean he's naive, because if you read, in fact, Bunche, there's a shelf of books on Bunche. I like Charles Henry's book, Ralph Bunche. Is it American Negro or Other? So I forget the subtitle. Charles P. Henry, my friend Charles Henry, used to be at Cal Berkeley for many years. I met him when he was president of the the National Council for Black Studies. Brian Urquhart's book on Ralph Bunche. There's a lot of stuff on Bunche, and then Bunche wrote a lot. There's a massive book which contains some of the memos that he wrote for the American Dilemma Project, Gunnar Myrdal's project. Thank you, Karen. Model Negro or American Other. Yes, it's a tension. When you read Bunch's own writing, the memos he wrote that informed Gunnar Myrdal's American Dilemma, an American Dilemma that Myrdal put his name on, but there was a lot of black scholars involved in that. Bunch wrote hundreds of pages one summer at Howard while he was at Howard. And he wrote these memos on leadership in the black community. There have been several that are published, and I wish I could put my hands on one. I usually keep a couple of those volumes close, and I don't see anything on the shelf over there that would, I think I kind of know where probably one or two of them. One's on Ralph Bunch writing about the American Negro in the age of FDR. Another is a book that talks about, one of the memos has been reduced to a smaller volume. I think Jonathan Scott Holloway edited that, on Bunch and how he views Negro leadership. And then there's one that I kind of always keep close, and boy, this would be the time I don't have it. Oh, look at that. Ha! Ralph Bunch got jokes. When is his birthday? This is a reprint, because I actually have a copy of this, but I got that in storage. Elaine Locke edited a series of books called the Bronze Books. They were all at Howard at the time. This is in the 30s. He did one on Negro and art. Eric Williams, who was on faculty at the time, became the first prime minister, black prime minister of Trinidad and Tobago, first prime minister of Trinidad and Tobago, did one on Negro and economics. Sterling Brown did one, the Bronze Books. And this is Ralph Bunch's book, the Bronze Booklet number 4, A World View of Race, by Ralph J. Bunch, associate professor of political science, Howard University. This is interesting. This is 1936. Look at him asking these questions. What is race? The device of race in world economic and political conflict. Race and imperialism, race in the United States. Bunch is trying to theorize a concept of race that might contribute to solidarity politics and bust through these notions of white supremacy, white nationalism, and capitalism. It's a critique. It's all in there together. Now, this makes Bunch important, but if you never read it, if we don't study it, if we don't act on it, how important is it? What we're doing here, what we started now, going on close to 3 years, it'll be 3 years soon, is a weekly conversation now connected to this universe of governance formation that allows us to do two things: to tap into some of these things that ancestors have done before, strengthening those relationships, establishing them, unfortunately in some places because we don't remember this stuff or we haven't been introduced to it, and displacing, elevating, or centering, or somehow deferring to any one individual, no matter how brilliant, Bunch, Du Bois, whoever, in favor of including them in a structure, in a formation, in a way of knowing that centers sharing and participating. Again, if you weren't in the office hours this past Monday, when we had the conversation around movement and memory, around cultural meaning making, anchored by our reading Robert Ferris Thompson, the first 45 pages of his exhibition catalog, African Art in Motion, you really missed something, but it's all recorded there. It's all the archive, including the chat, which is really, in many ways, the point. Everybody participating, coming in, dealing with this question of values. We'll come back to that if we want. And as we now look at the new year, this Monday night, we will be grappling with the final conceptual category, movement and memory. That is anchored by, we have readings from Vincent Harding, There is a River, and an interview Claudia Tate did with the great Tony K. Bambara, something we read last year. We're going to revisit in the context of movement and memory. We're ramping up this collective reimagining. And that's what allows us to build community. This allows us to have collective assessment, collective criticism, collective moments where we are able to restore. And probably something, I just want to drop this in passing as I get to the next point. But when you have that, then there's collective understanding. And out of that collective understanding, we can take collective action. And out of that collective action becomes establishing the kind of world we want to live in, where things won't become normalized. Like, for example, and I'll just put this as a footnote, but since, we shared this and talked about it and you were so upset about it and I was too, what happened to Wendell Pierce the other night? on Broadway. I think night before last, wasn't it? Or a couple nights ago. Pierce is starring in Death of a Salesman on Broadway. And, you know, at some point, a sister who was sitting in the front row with her husband, the sister gets up, comes back in for the next after intermission, and gets in a shouting match and starts shouting at the stage and responding. She had been doing it all night. Maybe she had some drink, maybe not. The observers have said maybe, who knows. Wendell Pierce does something that anybody in here who's an actor or actress knows you don't do. He broke stage. He had to literally stop the performance. House lights come up. He offers to give the couple their money back. He says, "I'm sorry, but I can't really disrupt." Ladies constantly screaming at the damn stage. And he's trying to manage it. He said, "Y'all really don't have to go." But at that point, they didn't call the house, the police, the security or whatever. They got to go. And she's screaming the whole way. And the brother is screaming back, "We want our money back." He said, "I'll give you your money. I will pay for your money. Get out of petty cash. Get these people their money back." I mean, but he said, and then he says, "I have waited too long for this." People start clapping. He said, "You have waited too long for this." The question becomes, and you asked this, Prof, when we were talking about it, what's the protocol? Why we act like that? I don't know if any of y'all ever been to a Broadway play where that happened. Not that they broke stage, but where people talking back to the stage. I'm not talking about Tyler Perry.
Patti LuPone, somebody had their phone off, but the Patti LuPone will lay you out if you come to her Broadway.
Oh, really?
Patti LuPone is legendary. Yes.
Thank you for filling that gap in my knowledge. I did not realize that because, going up to Tennessee State, W. Derry Cox and Devereaux Brady and them, you never break stage. Lawrence James, it could be on fire in the audience. You keep going. But I'd never seen it before. Wow. So Patti LuPone is known for that. Yeah. Good to know. I know I didn't see them break stage, but when I saw Viola Davis and Denzel Washington in Fences, our people, we up in there watching Fences from a governance perspective. And when Viola Davis told Denzel Washington, that baby that you had out of this relationship, she can stay here. And she said, "Today, this baby has gained a mother, but you have lost a wife." Them Negroes in the audience, "You tell him, I'm like, and I'm sitting there looking at Davis and Washington like, I know y'all want to say, "Will you Negroes please be quiet?" But they got to take that energy and recycle it. But this is the constant dialogue. It's one of the geniuses of August Wilson. It's always, I remember when I saw Joe Turner's Come and Gone on Broadway, the same production of it that the Obamas attended a couple of days before that. We sit up in there watching it. And you can always tell when there are African people in a play that's about African people, because watching a play when it's African, because we laughing and getting mad at the right places. You know what I'm saying? Oh, you ever been in one of them audiences where white people are laughing in the wrong places and black people are laughing in the right places? And sometimes white people will laugh in the right places after they hear black people. You're like, so and so, white people, oh, what? It would take too long to explain what's going on. But I'm saying this interactive part is very much part of our experience. Now the question becomes, particularly as we go into part 2 of this intro class, as we come here on the last day of the year, and shout out to everybody, all the folks in East Africa, particularly the Ethiopians, whose Christmas is the oldest Christmas, for whom last week was not Christmas Day, last Sunday was not Christmas Day. I think Christmas, and y'all help me in the chat, I think Christmas in the Ethiopian calendar would be, in the Western calendar we have now, the Gregorian calendar, January the 7th. So I think it's January the 7th, because you always know that it's not Christmas. So yeah. And of course, New Year is where it's supposed to be. That would be the Ethiopian New Year's in September. Like the calendar is the way it was supposed to be, the original calendar, or the older.
And it is January 7th.
It's January 7th. Okay. So everybody, all the Ethiopians, all the Habesha, all the folks who go back to Ge'ez, even before Amharic, all the folks from Gondar and all the places, we'll say Merry Christmas next week to you. But at any rate, I'm saying all this to say that in this context of, as we're going on this global journey beginning in 2023, after we finish this coming up Monday night with the last conceptual category in our framework, which ends part 2 of our course, which is movement and memory. How did or do Africans remember any particular moment in time and space? We then move into part 2. And somebody on in the YouTube side was asking in the comments, about reading lists. I said, come on in the narrative. We got all the bookstores together. We got plenty of materials in terms of where to go and what. But in part 2 of the Africana Studies class, we are reading several books. The first of which, of course, in mid-January will be The Coming. The Coming will help us answer the second framing question, which is, how did Africans preserve and affirm their ways of life and use their identities as means to resist enslavement? And of course, we're going to be joined by a Nubian, one of the most prolific writers that we have. Just a remarkable brother. Certainly one of my jugglers. He would reject that. But I'm telling you, this man helped shape my life along with many others. Brother Cedric, one of his sons. Dr. Daniel Black from Clark Atlanta University. We're reading his book, The Coming, and he's going to join us about midway through the month to have this conversation. This work is improving all of us. It's certainly improving my practice as a teacher and other places and interaction with folk. I think all of us are drawing from this because all of us are contributing, which is where I want to go for this in terms of this story. What's going on in 2023? Well, we're facing a global structure, a social structure that is continuing to dissolve. It's continuing to reform itself. We don't know what it's going to look like. You got a guy like George Santos here in the United States. That's what's in the headlines in the United States of America. This fake person saying he was this, went to school here, had this money. Did his mama pass on November 11th, 2001 as a victim of the destruction at the World Trade Center? Or did she pass years later? Well, it's clear now that she didn't pass in 9/11/2001. So, I mean, all this kind of thing. But is he going to get kicked out of Congress? No, because the White Nationalist Party needs his vote. Kevin McCarthy needs his vote. Will Kevin McCarthy be the Speaker of the House? Well, maybe not. Then today we get the news that, Cardinal Ratzinger, now then known as Pope Benedict XVI, the first German Pope in almost 500 years, who then retired and passed it off, couldn't do it no more. He was John Paul II's right-hand man. He made transition. Okay, all right. Bolsonaro. Those of us said, we need your wisdom on this, brother. If you can slip in Monday night, it might be good for you to come in and give us a little update down Brazil way, because Bolsonaro, that fascist, is by all reports right now, as we meet today, with his brother. Not his biological brother, his ideological brother. That will be Donald J. Trump. He got on a plane yesterday. Bolsonaro, the president of Brazil. By the way, this is how the Brazil government works, right? When the new president comes in, the old president's supposed to exchange. They got a sash, the symbol of government that you pass over. Well, they got to figure out now who's going to give the sash, because the vice president of Brazil now is the acting president of Brazil, because that's what happens whenever the president leaves the country. Jair Bolsonaro got on a plane yesterday headed for Florida, landed in Orlando, probably at Mar-a-Lago as we speak. He not gonna give that sash to Lula da Silva. Well, you know what? You can go to hell and stay. No problem. And then almost in tears, the reports are, he was saying, I couldn't find a legal way to stay in power. Right. Your boy tried. So now you're gonna go eat cheap steak and do whatever the hell else y'all do down in Mar-a-Lago with your friend Donald Trump. Now, Juan Guaido in Venezuela. Oh, that comic, that buffoon is finally out. Because remember, the United States government been trying to overthrow the Venezuelan government for years. Juan Guaido, who then had shoes thrown at him, kicked in the behind, can't show his face in public. Well, Juan Guaido, who was the leader of the opposition in the in the Venezuelan legislature, who was coming here to the United States all the time, who the United States government recognized as the legitimate president of Venezuela. Ain't nobody vote for Juan Guaido. I mean, this country will just overthrow your stuff and then pump you full of other stories. We be talking about other stuff. Anyway, Guaido's out because in the Brazilian legislature, they voted to dissolve that opposition movement. Guaido pleaded with them, well, just switch me out then. Put somebody else. We got to have the opposition movement. No. United States leaning on them. No, Guaido. No, you go. Hee-haw, goodbye. Hee-haw, haw, haw. I say that because his ears be sticking out. Anyway, Guaido is gone. Now, what else is going on? In the beginning of 2023, we're going into 2023, seeing again this notion of the dissolution of this order. All these African leaders were brought to Washington, D.C. a couple of weeks ago. We talked about that. And, they're trying to figure out, the United States, how they can insert themselves in Africa more strong, more virulently. Zimbabwe wasn't banned. They be leaning on Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe just announced that they are keeping their lithium at home. Why is that important? Well, we know lithium is what you use for these electric batteries. And Zim has enough lithium to supply 20% of the world's lithium needs. That's major. They say, well, you know what? Instead of shipping this, and we're going to stop this artisanal digging. They call it artisanal, but don't think about it like you went to the boutique grocery store and bought some artisanal foods. No, artisanal in the sense of you got mining companies, illegal people paying people to dig up lithium and sneak it out the country. Zim saying, no, the government said we're going to crack down on that. We're going to keep the lithium at home, and we need to build some battery factories. Oh, shit. Now, guess who also said, Nigeria. Here we go with them damn Nigerians. See, Nigerian, when the giant of Africa gets its act together, the whole thing gonna change. Now, you know, it's no accident they had on them people over here. There's no accident that Blinken and them was signing deals trying to get these precious metals out of Zambia. You know, there's no, and Angola. There's no accident. Why? Zimbabwe, who they always have tried to isolate. And as John Clark said in some stories, it ain't no good guys. Robert Mugabe, or Uncle Bob, as the students used to call him when we would go to South Africa at the University of Cape Town and University of Western Cape and sit around with students from all over Southern Africa. And the Zim students were like, I know he's a hero to y'all, but y'all too far away from it. He did some great things, and now he done gone left. Again, people over generations doing different things. But United States, England, they always want to isolate Zimbabwe. Okay, well, Zim said, we keeping our lithium. Oh, my God. And if they keep theirs, yes, thank you. We've got all of this going on at the same time that as we enter 2023, we've seen, and let's pause here for a minute. Let's take a couple of minutes, Prof, because since last January, as we kind of wind this up, we saw a lot of people make transition. Here at the end, there's some names we're going to mention here. It kind of helps us come back to our home. But we talked this year with Sidney Poitier, Cicely Tyson. Seems like an eternity ago, doesn't it? But all that was this year, right? More recently, of course, Tom Bell. We talked about Tom Bell, Lamont Dozier before. Did you ever cross paths with Barbara Walters?
No, I did not.
I know I remember, and I got her, it's probably in storage too, though. That's one of the ones I probably would have taken in storage, her memoir.
Yeah, I can't say that she was an inspiration to me.
Yeah, could you say a little bit something more about that? Because see, I remember reading a few pages in her autobiography where she talks about that affair she had with Edmund Brooke, Senator Brooke from Massachusetts.
Yeah.
But why wasn't she inspiration for you?
I don't know. I never, I don't know. If I'm being honest, I didn't see myself in her style wise. And, you know, I know she was a journalist. She had there's some great interviews. Sean Connery admitting that he liked to slap women if they get out of line.
Jesus. Talk about grace. Talk about grace. I mean,
wait a minute.
Nobody saw that coming. James Bond, Scotsman, sex with women, every movie, and you like to slap women around? Yeah, nobody saw that coming.
If they deserve it, you know. I was like, what? And I know she had this interview with Yasser Arafat that was very interesting. Yeah.
I was never really impressed with Barbara Walters, and there are those who cape for her. You know, we see some of the Black people cape, so that's interesting. You say, but no, she seemed kind of pedestrian to me. She certainly can't be compared to Charlotte Bass or Mal Good. I mean, when we gonna talk about our journalists, like you say, even the Robinson,
we don't know them though, you know, and even we don't know them enough to talk about them. Do you know what I'm saying? So this is what we're doing here, you know, kind of remembering and reminding people. You know, that journey you took us on last week. I'm like, I know all of the songs and didn't know the man. You know, so this is important. This is important, right? So,
and by the way, again, collective work, y'all. Look, when we talked about Tom Bell last week and went into the chat and then went into YouTube on the comments, brother shared that he used to stay with Linda Creed, Tom Bell's writing partner, one of his writing partners who wrote so many of the great hits. And when when the brother said, "Oh yeah, I used to stay with her. She used to pick me up after school, and the music would all be all in the house." And I'm thinking, wow, this is how we do the collective work. See, collective work is not going to be about individual scholars, because again, I mean, I read all those books, but I don't trust the books. I don't trust the books because the books are based on narratives, and narratives are important, but narratives are not the central thing. And I completely left out, and there were so many other things could have mentioned, but you know, as I mentioned on Monday night, we were talking. They came to Linda Creed, Tom Bell's writing partner, who made transition at 37 years old, and they went to Linda Creed like, you know, we want you to write a song for this movie. And Tom Bell and Linda Creed posed, I mean, we, you know, break up to make up, that's all we do. That's Tom Bell and Linda Creed. I'd like to one day be the owner of the first house on the moon. And you hear those congas. Oh, that's Tom Bell and Linda Creed. The stylistics, of course. And then Linda Creed and Tom Bell wrote one of my favorite Phyllis Hyman's. Oh, friend, it's so nice to have you with me again. And it doesn't matter where you have been. Yeah, that's, man, old friend. Phyllis Hyman, what a talent. But they came to Linda Creed and said, we want you to write this song for the movies. For this movie that we're doing based on an autobiography that actually was acquired by Toni Morrison when she was editor at Random House, called The Greatest. It was Muhammad Ali. And Richard Durham actually ghost wrote that. Richard Durham, who's a very important, looking around, I know I got a copy of The Greatest around here, but Richard Durham, there are a couple of good, well, he Destination Freedom was a radio series he did. Durham was an important writer, an important writer for radio and broadcast. My friend Sonia Williams, who was on faculty at Howard University, did Word Warrior is the name of the book she did on Richard Durham, but you can also get Durham's book, where you see a lot of the scripts that he did. He did all these radio plays on famous and important Black people back in the 1940s and 50s. Very important. Richard Durham. Some people may be aware of the name. Again, I say these names not only to make us aware, but to also invite us to this work, which I'm saying is the center of our work, which is the collective work, because it's really in the comments, it's really in the conversations that we see people adding to this. But at any rate, Linda Creed said, okay. So what does she do? Within a day, she writes the lyrics. I believe the children are the future. Teach them well and let them lead the way. Show them all the beauty they possess inside. Give them a sense of pride to make it easier. Let the children's laughter remind us how we used to be. I mean, Linda Creed wrote The Greatest. It's Tom Bell's writing partner. Didn't make it to 40 years old, 37 years old. You know, disease took her, cancer took her. I'm saying all that to say that, you know, these things were brought up in the comments. I say, yeah, that's right. Collectively, we recover this memory, and it's very important for us to do that. The greatest love of all. And it seems to me that there's not always a story, but it only seems like there's always a story of African people somewhere behind so many things we know. It's funny, Prof, and then I want to keep going on what we in this valence we're talking about. Oh man, it's so many. When you said Sean Connery, it made me think James Bond. I think about James Bond. I think about the scores for James Bond, the most famous theme in the history of movies, right? When you hear da 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 da, you know that score. That's the James Bond theme, right? And remember that time? It was a couple years ago when I showed you all the James Bond novels. Then you'd be like, what are you doing with those? I said, well, I collect those too, right? Because that guy was living in Jamaica. He had a place in Jamaica. Right, Goldeneye, I think, because they named one of the movies for his.
Yeah, it is Goldeneye. Ian Fleming, yes.
Ian Fleming, right? And so it's funny because in Live and Let Die, of course, Roger Moore played James Bond, and I'll just do this one quickly because it just came to mind when you said Sean Connery. Made me think about that, and I was thinking about all the songs we didn't mention. Paul McCartney wrote the song "Live and Let Die," Remember, that was the one where Yaphet Kotto played the Voodoo King or whatever, Mr. Big, whatever. And then in New York, he was the drug dealer. All these damn stereotypes in these James Bond movies. And so there's actually a documentary on the songs of Bond. And one of the guys tells the story that Paul McCartney, who of course, Paul McCartney and Wings recorded that album, not with Live and Let Die on it, but with come on, son. Anyway, it'll come to me in a minute. Band on the Run. That was recorded in Nigeria. It's a story for another day. Because you hear him got all this African influence. But in Live and Let Die, when you were young and your heart was an open book, you used to say, live and let live. You know you did, you know you did, you know you did. But if this ever-changing world in which we live in makes you give in and cry, then the minor key, then live and let die, boom, then timpanies come in, right? In the middle of that, they got a break that's really reggae break. What does it matter to ya? If you got a job to do, you got to do it well. And you hear the kind of reggae. You got to give the other fella hell. Well, we finished the song, gave it to the producers, and they said, okay, now who we gonna get to sing this song? They suggested, was it Thelma Houston? I know they suggested Aretha Franklin. They said, no, if you don't have Paul McCartney singing Live and Let Die, then you don't get the song. That's how Paul McCartney ended up singing Live and Let Die. They was gonna have Aretha Franklin say, I'm trying to imagine Aretha Franklin singing that song. Anyway, back to our regular as we were talking.
She would have murdered it.
What is that?
She would have murdered it the way she did the Pavarotti opera. I mean,
can you imagine that?
Gosh,
can you imagine? I'm trying to imagine. When you were young and your heart was open.
Yes.
Woo! You used to say, live and let live. She would have took that chorus out, unless her sister then were back there backing her up. In this ever-changing world in which you live in, makes you give and cry. Live and let die. She would have been playing the piano on it. Yeah. Shit, that might have been they may have set someone on fire if Aretha Franklin had sang that. Right. Paul McCartney's still walking the earth. But anyway, so there's so many people who made transition this year. And I just want to spend a little time as we kind of close today and mention a few of the books that I thought were just good this year as we think about what we're going to do in 2023 and this continuing work. A few of them. And I'm mentioning them in this context again, strengthening and growing the collective sharing and participating that we're doing. Not just filling in gaps, but literally anchoring the way we should be thinking about our work. When we think about how we do things in this work of recovery, we have to remember that our work is collective work. And there are individuals who are incredibly important in that work because everybody has different talents and gifts, but only together can we progress. And we live in a society which tries to curate Black people. And I will probably at some point watch the Coach Prime documentary. And, you know, God bless Deion Sanders and all the lives he's impacted and changed. And then we get the news this week that Ed Reed is going to be the head football coach at Bethune-Cookman. And every bit the player at safety that Deion Sanders was at cornerback. And again, continuing to shine a spotlight in terms of a social structure gaze and those Negroes who are basically firmly anchored in the social structure on something that governance formations among African people in the United States are well aware of, which is the culture and nature of historically Black colleges. And I want to pause here to lift the name of a brother who just made transition, another iconic figure who is all too little known, the great Bobby L. Lovett. Bobby Lovett from Memphis, Tennessee, went to Booker T. Washington High School in Memphis, and is a graduate of Arkansas A&M State College, University of Arkansas Pine Bluff. Those of you know UAPB. Shout out again, the SWAC. He taught school, public school, Memphis Public Schools, and he spent over 3 decades, nearly 4 decades, on the faculty of Tennessee State University. He was one of my teachers. Taught my brother, taught my sister. He became the dean of the College of Arts and Sciences. He made transition last week. His ritual was on the 30th of December. I'm unable to go to Nashville, but I got a chance to watch. Bobby Lovett, one of the most important memory keepers we have, particularly when it comes to Black folk and historically Black colleges and universities. Lovett wrote a history of African Americans in Nashville, Tennessee. He wrote several books in that vein. Also wrote about the R.H. Boyd and the Boyd family and the Boyd Company. Those of you who know about Black publishing, you know the name of Boyd. That would be the Baptist literature. That would be the Sunday school books. If you at a black church and you got Black Sunday school books, then you know the name Boyd, because that the Baptist publishing house. If you Baptist, the Baptist publishing house, the hymnals, the Sunday school books, that was all published in Nashville. The Boyd family still going strong. Bobby Lovett was on the board actually of Citizens Bank, another independent Black-owned bank founded by the Boyds, R.H. Boyd. Shout out to the Boyd family. But here are two books I want to mention with Professor Lovett, because this is a name we should all know. I've mentioned this one before, but I'll show it to you again. This is his 2011 book, Bobby Lovett, America's Historically Black Colleges and Universities. There's been a lot written about HBCUs recently, and a lot of good information. All of those books, put them over there. You know, get them, send them, but start with this one if you want to know about HBCUs, because prior to this book, there really wasn't a single book that covered this. He goes back to 1837 with the Institute for Colored Youth, which became Cheney. And the epigraph that frames the book is from Pushkin, Alexander Pushkin, since we're talking about Russia. With wearied hope, we have been waiting the moment of our sacred freedom. And he dedicates the book to all those who gave me help along the way, especially my children, grandchildren, wife, and other family members who have continuously encouraged me. His brother spoke at the funeral, his children too. But Bobby Lovett, Ashe, this brother right here. I love this brother. He helped, you know, as we talk about, know him, know me. These are the HBCU master teachers. And he, I should mention one other thing. And this is, you know, in the vein of what happens at HBCUs. Dr. Lovett says, he started this book in 2004, the Educational Testing Service in Princeton, New Jersey. They were having a conversation and they had a project ETS had founded to develop presentations showing the valuable contributions of the historically Black colleges and universities. He was part of a 3-person team with Beverly Guy Sheftall, our sister Beverly Guy Sheftall, who's at Spelman, and Howard Simmons at Morgan State. So they put together a 20-page historical narrative on HBCUs. This is 2004. This is not ancient history. He did the survey. He said there was no single narrative history of HBCUs. So Bobby Lovett then decided he's going to write one. This is what he says. He says, most social science researchers, especially at HBCUs, must conduct research and write with little or no funding or reduction in class load. Faculties at HBCUs carry heavy teaching loads and usually work without graduate assistants. Nonetheless, to be good teachers, they must create, organize, write, and publish new information. He did it all. He was a teacher, he was an administrator, he's a scholar who published books. Get this book. And I'm going to come back to that theme in a minute in terms of what happens, because you have a lot of people who have time, particularly now. They get subsidized, they get these foundation grants, and they say, we're going to write the definitive history. No. I trust something from somebody who was there, who lived it, who talks about it, who writes it, who puts it on. Because now narratives are very important. Richard Rhoda, a white dude who is retired, used to be the head of the Tennessee Higher Education Commission, who, when I knew him as an undergraduate at Tennessee State, was a administrator at Tennessee State, and we fought him tooth and nail. This white man, we didn't trust no white people, because we said, you're here to try to turn Tennessee State into a white school. Rhoda spoke at Lovett's funeral yesterday, and he said that he quoted Lydia Palgreen, who had an article in last week's New York Times talking about the January 6th commission. And I was going to shout out to Lynn Cheney for protecting her friend, Jenny Thomas. Y'all think Lynn Cheney is a hero. I know we don't, but somebody watching this does. You should put that aside. She tried to save her friend, but she can't save her friend's country, though, or hers either. That's a story for another day, maybe a soon day, maybe 2023. But Rhoda, quoting Lydia Palgreen, writing about January the 6th, said it's important to tell the story of what happened, because if you don't tell stories, we don't get understanding. And Paul Green is making this point, and I agree with Paul Green. Paul Green's point was, if you just have facts, if you just have data, if you just have information, people don't draw meaning from that without narrative. You got to tell a story. Bobby Lovett, I trust Bobby Lovett to tell the story of HBCUs. I trust him before I trust any graduate student or brilliant young scholar who don't know nothing about HBCUs, who has gone through the archives and is assembled, and this data is helping them understand, and they are looking at the subaltern nature of and how this HBCU subvert the conventional notions of American whatever. Give me Bobby Lovett. In fact, give me Bobby Lovett on the school I graduated from. This is a book he published the following year, A Touch of Greatness, A History of Tennessee State University, Bobby L. Lovett, the great Bobby Lovett. Here he is with that black man look. Yoruba, what y'all call it? Your Yoruba speakers, Itutu, coolness. We talked about that Monday night. Look at Bobby Lovett. That's the man, right? That's a Memphis Negro right there. That look. Oh man, I love Dr. Lovett. I shall. But anyway, I'm bringing that up because who frames the narrative gets to shape how we see things. And that's where I want to spend the last few minutes today. Here we are in the season of Kwanzaa. The outsized contribution of Maulana Karenga really can't be overstated. Professor Hunter, I was having this conversation the other night with Reba Kelsey, Dr. Kelsey, one of my friends at Morehouse School of Medicine. We were talking about this, and I said, Reba, can you think of another person of African descent? And I'm gonna ask y'all this too, and I ask you, Prof. Any person of African descent, any single person who has had more influence on the behavior of other human beings when it comes to doing something deliberately for Black people that everybody else is doing deliberately for Black people in the United States? Is there anybody more influential than Karenga? Can y'all think of one? Let me look in the chat. I'm gonna look in when we post this, we're gonna look in the comments as well. Anybody? Yeah, I don't know about them Memphis old heads. I'm with you. I'm with you, CL. Shaka. Don't do it. Don't do it. Shaka. Shaka, get out of my head. Get out of my head, Shaka Khan. With that African name you got from the Panthers. We're gonna talk about Shaka because she got a lot more years to be here. Can you think of another?
Define do for.
In other words, Kwanzaa is driven by these principles. It's in Nguzo Saba, right? Mm-hmm. And of course, there are a lot of books on it. I mean, Karenga himself has written several books. This is the book he did for the post office, Kwanzaa Celebrate, when they did the unveiling of the Kwanzaa stamp. Oh, by the way, I was at the post office on Thursday, and I love going to the post office because the sisters and brothers work at the post office. You know, the Black people at the post office, and the sister was saying, look, now you better get these stamps now because post office going up on postage at the beginning of the year, going up 3 cents. I said, okay. So I bought a bunch of Kwanzaa Forever stamps. The sister just designed a new Kwanzaa stamp. So it's not the one we have here. And so anyway, and then Monia Lewis was the African American Heritage stamp for this year. I think John Lewis is next year. This is Keith Mays' book, Kwanzaa, Black Power, and the Making of the African American Holiday Tradition. An excellent book. A lot of good information in here. He drives it into the ditch, as far as I'm concerned, with the conclusion where he then says, let me just read this to be honest with your brother. I mean, I don't see how he gets there, but I do understand why he would say this. He says, what is appealing about these observances? He talks about Kwanzaa, Martin Luther King Day, and Black History Month, and has fostered there's the other person. I'll come back to it now. And has fostered their endurance is that there is their import beyond the original holiday audience, their capacity to speak to multiple audiences, their connection with broad-based social movements, and their association with American progress. And he starts talking about how Kwanzaa is celebrated by everybody. Every group has these values. He says every group that. Come on, bro. So what I mean, I ain't mad at him. I understand. I understand when you don't think you can win. You start trying to negotiate a deal. Kwanzaa's for everybody. The Rugrats. Okay. What part of?
So what do you do with Black folk? Because I wasn't raised with Kwanzaa.
Neither was I.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I was and I wasn't, which is what we were doing tonight. Yeah.
you know, we didn't like candles in our homes. We had a Christmas tree and all of the other things. But everyday Kwanzaa has become like a mantra on my shelf because the principles are things that if we, you know, we speak it into existence, it is powerful. If we
Yes.
all hold true to them. So are you talking about this philosophically or
Yes.
actually?
Yes, that's what I'm talking about. The name that popped in my mind as I'm looking at Mazeman, it might be Carter G. Woodson.
Yes.
Would be
Yes.
Carter. Would be,
Yes.
but if we think about Woodson, of course, Woodson lays the foundation for Karenga. And by Woodson, I don't mean Carter Woodson alone. I mean the people with him and around him. Mary Bethune, everybody, Charles Wesley, Nanny Helen Burroughs here in DC. I'm talking about all the people, all of the chapters of the Association for the Study of Then Negro Life and History, all of that. When I'm talking about Karenga, I'm not talking just about Karenga.
Right.
They tried to trash Kamala Harris again. Talking about she was celebrating Kwanzaa. She's in there with her husband, giving a happy Kwanzaa message, and here come the haters. You weren't at Kwanzaa. You was too young. Okay, everybody, your mouths get their little needle and sew them shut. Here's the problem. Kamala Harris born 1965. Well, 64, right? Kwanzaa, first Kwanzaa celebration, 1965. She wasn't it. Okay. Here's a name, Makiyna, Queen Mother Makina, Sabeko Kwate. Sabeko, Sibeko, Kwate, Koute. She, lifelong resident of the Bay Area, Oakland. She's known as the Queen Mother of Kwanzaa. She made transition in 2017, 90 years old. She traveled to South LA and Southern LA, and then Karen came up and they went back for. Karen gave her a mimeographed kind of copy of what they had developed around this question of Kwanzaa with just one A. She is the one who spread, her birth name was Harriet Smith. Harriet Edith Smith. She is the one who pulled together the Kwanzaa Collective in the Bay Area. She's the one who, along with them, started spreading Kwanzaa up and down the West Coast and then traveled all over the country. Mays does a good job of documenting this. He actually talked with her. In fact, we talk about the archive. I'm sure there'll be more people writing definitive histories of Kwanzaa because I was looking at the exhibition catalog the other day, the Swan exhibition catalog in 2019. Her papers, about 17 boxes of her papers, were bought for $13,000, about almost $14,000. And so I don't know whether they at Emory or one of these other archives where they collect our history. But the point is, we are the history. We got to tell these stories. So if you don't know that name, Queen Mother Makina, please look her up because it's not just Karenga. Karenga, however, has this outsized influence. So to answer your question, how I'm defining it, I'm saying, are there things we do now as Black people, as a we, regardless of how they spill over into other places, Macy's, the post office, or the Rugrats, or Hallmark, wherever they spill, you can't get rid of that black candle, umoja. And as Keith Mays says, everyone has these values. And I agree. Everyone has these values to strive for and maintain unity in the family, community, nation, and race. Everybody has these values. Marjorie Taylor Greene has these values, Keith. I agree with you, Dr. Mays. She practiced them with George Santos and then when she was at that party the other night where the white nationalists were, and George Santos, the liar, and Marjorie Taylor Greene was there. And yeah, that would be race, right? Man, come on, brother. I understand you got to get the book published, but and I ain't mad at you. Believe me, this is one of the reasons why I'm so deeply grateful that we have this Black space where we can deal with complicated questions and contradictions and interact with each other without trying to plead for our humanity and putting a line in that don't make no sense while I'm writing it. But I got to get this past the reviewers. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that influence, you can't get rid of that black candle. You can't get rid of the red or green candle. You can't get rid of the meaning. Black for the people, red for struggle, the blood, the collection, green for prosperity, the future, all that. Yeah, that's us. That black candle is not going to be a white candle, not going to be a beige candle, not going to be all different colors in one candle. It's going to be a black candle. We all do that together. Habari Gani, Umoja, Kujichagulia, Ujima, Ujamaa, Kuumba, Nia, Imani. Whoa, what's that? Kiswahili, not Spanish. You can't translate it. You could, but it would lose its meaning. Why? This is a black ass holiday, and it ain't Black American. It's just a made up holiday. Name one that's not. Come on now, let's not dance that dance. That's just foolish. What you're really saying is we can't do nothing to ourselves. We got to police ourselves. No. And then the critics, the whole critical response to Kwanzaa, I think is very interesting, because when they start talking and they say, well, Alana Karenga was a very important, hush, because you still dragging trees in your house and putting ornaments on them, and then put a manger underneath it, and then hung some stockings on it, and then waiting for this home invasion, man. So we don't really want to examine these rituals too closely. Now, do we? Another brother's birthday, who just, in fact, his birthday today, Joseph Antonio Alfredo Ben-Jacquinin, the Avenger, as I like to call him. I mentioned last week that I'd mentioned him. These are a couple of his books: Black Man of the Nile and His Family, self-published. Is that cardboard, Dr. Ben? Also, The Black Man's Religion and Extracts and Comments from the Holy Black Bible. See, Ben-Jacquinin would be hell on these major Western religions. He wrote a massive book called African Origins of the Major Western Religions. Now, Dr. Ben ain't for everybody's taste. If you want to get a couple of smaller little books, here are a couple. One published actually by our brother Paul Coates, Black Classic Press, A Chronology of the Bible, Challenge to the Standard Version, Joseph Ben-Jacquinin. Here's another one that he's talking about the attack on Black people for being anti-Semitic. Dr. Ben was born a Jew. He's Jewish. So he wrote this book, Welcome Back Home, Black Anti-Semite Jew, the Black Jew Outside the Door. Dr. Ben could be a rough ride, but I tell you what, here he is. Here's a picture of him with Leonard Jeffries. Shout out to Dr. Jeffries and Mama Roslyn. Dr. Jeffries just underwent a procedure. He's recovering now. Shout out to Leonard Jeffries. And John Henry Clark, of course, who was born January 1st. His birthday's tomorrow. And the great Joseph Ben-Jacquinin, his brother, who, this is from the Amsterdam News, where black killer and white victim lovers. Ben's style, Ben would put pictures in his books. And he went to Egypt more than anybody. He was the first one to really go African from the diaspora, to go many times. He wrote books in ways, his fashion, and me and Paul have had this conversation. Now, that's why I love talking to Paul. Paul, talk about a generous brother. He would draw his own maps, and he kept a portfolio with him. Anytime you see Dr. Ben, one time we were in Cincinnati one time, I said, Dr. Ben, what you doing? He was sitting with Dr. Clark. He writing. If he's not talking, he writing. He's somewhere studying. He said he had a camera he take with him. You run into Dr. Ben in the Egyptian Museum. Ben, but anyway, I'm saying all that to say that when we start thinking about this question of individuals contributing, when you see a Karenga and you're seeing a man who is brilliant, very influential, at the center of creating, and a creator in terms of this kind of ability to synthesize and then rearticulate and connect a philosophy, Kawaida, a set of principles in Nguzo Saba, a ritual, Kwanzaa, that has now, because it couldn't be stopped, overflowed the boundaries of the original communities it was anchored with. This is a second edition of a book he wrote called The African American Holiday of Kwanzaa. Karenga talks about it overflowing the boundaries. Here's a picture of him when he was alive, younger. He published this himself, of course, University of St. Croix Press. But I'm saying that to say that I think about people of influence. People now lighting Kwanzaa candles, at least saying Happy Kwanzaa, at least not in public saying nothing crazy to nobody's face about Kwanzaa. The President of the United States saying Happy Kwanzaa. Maybe Woodson and Black History Month. But even Black History Month doesn't have this anchoring way of knowing that is anchored in a governance formation that has a very deliberate purpose of collective Black liberation. Black History Month, know your past, know your history, be proud. Kwanzaa and Nguzo Saba, Kawaida, let's move collectively together, grounded in the best of our memory and moving forward by innovating based in that grounding of memory. Well, that's implied in Black History Month, yeah, but it ain't explicitly stated. You can't light them Kwanzaa candles without saying that, Keith Mays notwithstanding. You understand? But who gets to tell the story? Oh, wow. Wow, DeTorre, your first trip to Africa was with Dr. Ben. It's going to be a lot of people like that. Ben-Jacquinin was no joke. He did not bite his tongue. No question. All right. Where am I going with this as we kind of wrap, thinking about coming up into the new year? Well, when we think about who gets to tell this story, this is where the battle is. This is one of the biggest battles, and this is the battle we're going to win, And this is the battle that we have been winning in this space, and we are now getting stronger and stronger. And as Nubia grows and we have these convenings, we continue these convenings, the thing that really blows me away is how powerfully we have really begun to empty our collective memory. Even now in the chat, looking at this, in collective sharing and participating. No one individual gets to tell the story. Karinga couldn't tell the story by itself. Queen Mother Makina, Amiri Baraka. The story of Kwanzaa is the story of Black school teachers in the 70s and 80s, taking these into the public schools all over the United States of America. The story of Kwanzaa is in West Africa and East Africa and in the Caribbean and in Latin America, where Kwanzaa began to be practiced. The story of Kwanzaa way bigger than Maulana Karinga now, to the point where Karinga is still alive, still around, still doing, gives his weekly, daily Kwanzaa message, has been doing it every day, did the annual founder statement, and most people are not aware of it. You should listen to those things and think about those things, but understand that it's way bigger than that now. Hell, Hallmark and the Rugrats dealing with Kwanzaa. So I don't know of any one person, perhaps Woodson, and I want to, ask if anybody, let me see if anybody put any other names in the chat. I'm not talking about people who had great songs. I'm not talking about cultural icons. I'm talking about somebody who, out of their mind and out of their gift, contributed as part of sharing and participating a framework that is so impactful that people who wish harm on Black people can't come out their mouth with anything other than Happy Kwanzaa now. It's like a virus, a potentially liberating virus. Now, who gets to tell that story? Well, Karinga might. Malefi Asante, his friend, wrote a book called Maulana Karinga, an intellectual portrait. That is a great summary of many of Dr. Karinga's ideas, also deeply flawed in some ways. But the challenge is Dr. Asante, who I learned a great deal from. I went to Temple University because of Malefi Asante. Dr. Asante is telling a story from his perspective about his friend, and he himself is a towering intellect. And this question of Afrocentricity, very important. That's a narrative. Lydia Paul Green says facts don't mean nothing until you put them in a story, and that's what attracts people. Well, guess what? What we're doing here, we are using these iconic figures. We are using these outsized figures and what they represent to bring ourselves in community and then share and participate in telling our story together. And we're not doing it under a social structure where we got to ask for approval or change a sentence to get somebody to approve it. No, this is the power of what we're doing. So when we think about that work of recovery, that organic work of recovery, we know that there are individuals who did that work. Many of them are not as well known. This is a great little book called Against the Odds. Scholars who challenge racism in the 20th century. I like this book because it's interviews with people and first-person testimony by some of these people. Against the Odds. This is Ben Bowser and Louis Kushnick's book. There are people in here, for example, like John Henry Clark, of course. But chapter 1, John Glover Jackson, we'll talk about. He's another one we should know. John G. Jackson. I talk about John J. Frank Snowden's in here. John Hope Franklin, of course, birthday coming. St. Clair Drake. These are some of the names. But it's a good kind of testament to people who did a lot of this work and didn't get a lot of attention. But we now have this objective. I've been saying this all along. We've been talking about it all along, but let's now going in 2023, and we saw a preview of it Monday night in office hours as folk were contributing their own perspectives on cultural meaning making. We're going to see it again Monday night. We start talking about movement and memory. We all have, as you say, Prof, bricks to bring. We all have the ability to narrate collectively who we are. That's how we're building this we. And so an ancestor I want to end with, in fact, I want to end with him by quoting one of his countrymen as we think about the fact that tomorrow Lula da Silva will be inaugurated as president of Brazil. Let me see if I can find this quickly. Yes. This is from a book by Femi Ojo Ade. It's called Home in Exile, Abdias Nascimento, African Brazilian thinker and Pan-African visionary. This is one of those people. Absolutely. Abdias dos Nascimento. You never heard of Nascimento? Here's another book by him. I didn't pull all of them. One's called Africans in Brazil. I love this book. It's called Mixture or Massacre. Abdias do Nascimento. Very important book. But let me read this because this Nascimento is an ancestor I want to use to bring in the other ancestor. This is Femi Ojo-Ade at the beginning of his book on Nascimento. He says the year is 2007. As Obafemi Awolowo University, y'all know that university, University Ife now. It used to be University of Ife, now named for Obafemi Awolowo. As Obafemi Awolowo University is preparing to honor Abdias Nascimento, that's the university in Nigeria, as you know. The iconic African-Brazilian scholar, poet, politician, activist. He was a theater guy. He was a poet. He was an artist, musician, brilliant brother. And we're going to talk about Nascimento when we get to framing question 5. We're going to bring him in our Africana Studies class. Femi Ojo-Ade says, one's thoughts cannot but center upon his homeland. Back in the good old days of post-independence, the Brazilian football team, Santos, y'all see where we're going, visited Nigeria. The cynosure of all eyes was one Pele, Ore, the king, the black wizard, the black pearl, the man. The black wizard weaving his magic that devastated defenses and led his Samba nation to 3 World Cup trophies. His exceptional talent would later translate into fame and fortune in millions of hard currency, marbled mansions, and gilded gardens and white women. In the whitewashed world of mulattas and morenos, masquerading like their masters as Europeans in a society constructed and cultivated by Africa's children forced into slavery eons ago. The king's real name, Pele's real name, is Edson Arantes do Nascimento. Thoughts of Brazil. The year was 1977. We talked about that last week. And almighty Nigeria, Africa's giant and home to the world's largest black population ahead of Brazil, was hosting Festac. We talked about that last week. Brazil, represented by white and off-white so-called intellectuals, succeeded in officially silencing one of their country's greatest revolutionary minds from revealing the unsavory realities of the lived experiences of his fellow blacks in a racial paradise practicing democracy that, for the descendants of slaves, meant nothing but hell. Come on, Sid. Officialdom's mindless marginalization notwithstanding, the conscience of Brazil still managed to present its heart-wrenching positions in a lecture that would later become a document for the ages on Africans' worldwide condition. O Genocidio do Negro Brasilio, Racial Democracy in Brazil, Myth or Reality, foundation for this book right here. The name of the intellectual activist, artist, writer, politician is Abdias dos Nascimento. He talks about the fact that Nascimento shares a name with Pele. Nascimento is one of those guys that narrates the story. We're going to talk about him when we get to how did and do Africans make sense and participate in international convenings. We're going to talk about that. Framing question 5. Framing question 6. What ideas, leaders, and movements did Africans create in the 20th and 21st centuries to advance their liberation? We're going to talk about that. But I'm bringing Abdias dos Nascimento into the frame to end with Edson Nascimento. That, of course, would be Pele. Pele, nicknamed for one of his favorite players, as the young people called him the name, was a corruption of the name, and it kind of stuck. His birth name, Edson. His parents named him for Thomas Edison. I love this when people talk about Pele. There's a book by Mario Filho called The Black Man in Brazilian Soccer. Y'all should look that book up. It's fascinating to me because they did, in fact, the University of North Carolina Press did a new edition in 2021, and I got it around here somewhere. And it's very interesting because this guy, Mario Filho, was a Brazilian journalist. The original, he wrote the book in 1947. Remember, Brazil lost the World Cup in 1950. Pele, who was raised in Minas Gerais, in that province, that state in Brazil, black, okay? And when they lost the World Cup in 1950, Pele, who was 10 years old at the time, remember his father crying. His father was a hell of a soccer player, football player, right? Minho writes that, well, everybody, all the obituaries we've been reading about Pele says this. Pele tells his father, he said, I never saw my father cry. Brazil lost the World Cup. My daddy was crying. I told my daddy, don't worry. When I grow up, I'm gonna win the World Cup for you. You won 3. Imagine it. Here we are, many of us in this room right now in the United States. We know the name Pele, vaguely for many people. But this is the most accomplished player in the most popular sport, and not only in the world now, in the history of the world. There's nobody to compare him to, born and raised in the United States, with the possible exception. Prof, would you put, I mean, again, I'm going to ask you this, maybe Ali? I mean, Ali, but I'm saying, and of course, Pele and Ali, there's a very famous picture going making the rounds about Ali. You see Ali and Pele embracing. But Pele, what did he mean? And this is what Filho writes. He says, after the defeat of Brazil in 1950, who got blamed? The black players on the Brazil team. The black players, Barbosa, Juvenal, and Bigole, they got blamed. But this book that he wrote, this journalist, this Brazilian journalist in 1947, The Black Man in Soccer, he wrote another edition in like 1966. And by then, he says, by then, we done won the World Cup a couple of times. And Pele becomes the most important player on that team, the most popular football player in the world. And as Nascimento writes, Pele becomes a symbol of Brazil that allows these racists to pretend like, oh, we're not racist. Look, we got Pele, and they pretending now. But here's the genius, I think, of Pele. And by the way, the black man in Brazil, Brazilian soccer, what Filho does in 1947, he says there were black players before. There's a guy named Arthur Friedenreich. His daddy was German, mother Brazilian, Afro-Brazilian. Leonidas da Silva, whose father was Portuguese, mother Brazilian. Always the women, always the African women. Anyway, they were like, it was like 20 years between Friedenreich and da Silva, and then another generation between da Silva and Pele, except this time Pele wins the World Cup, comes back, wins another World Cup, comes back, wins another World Cup. I think the Mexico World Cup, those of you who are football fans know this much better than that. That's considered like one of the most impressive pieces. And this is what I love about the black man in Brazilian soccer. This is what he writes. He says that the life of a soccer player, he says, few people realize how much is demanded of a soccer player. He has to represent a club, Santos, you know. And remember, Prof, you too young to remember this, of course. I heard about it. In fact, there have been a couple of documentaries and a book on this. The New York Cosmos.
I heard about them.
Right, right. We were too young to remember. Right? I mean, this is the early 70s, mid 70s. 1975, I think, Pele signs a contract because they're trying to penetrate the U.S. market. So there he is, the New York Cosmos as a documentary. They have Studio 54. He out here in the streets, all the cocaine, all the money. But Pele is at the center of this. And one of the things that Filho writes is, he says, a soccer player represents a club, a city, a state, and the nation. What is expected of him is that he embody the best virtues of a man. In the case of the Brazilian, the best virtues of the Brazilian man. Now, here's the thing that he writes about Pele. Regardless of whatever else Pele did or didn't do in his life, here's what he didn't do. He didn't put a knife on his nose. He didn't straighten his hair. Boy, them old Negroes, man. And I know a lot of Continental Africans like this. Some of y'all cracking up thinking about what I'm about to say next. I swear, if the Continental Africans and Africans in the diaspora, who, the men now particularly, who said that they just not going to go gray, if they decided they just not going to put no coloring in their hair, I'm not sure that the black hair dye market wouldn't collapse. But anyway, the point is that Pele kept that black hair today, but he never straightened it. Pele made a very important point of saying, I am a black man. Now imagine this, the most popular athlete in the most popular sport in the world, in the history of the world, really. I'm a black man. And I know y'all gonna try to use me for this other stuff, and I might do stuff, and you be like, what is he doing? What's that white woman? No, but hey, my mother, my father, my people, black. He went to South Africa in the 1960s. They told him, And the other Afro-Brazilian players, y'all can't get off the plane until we. He said, oh, no problem. I'm not coming back to South Africa until Nelson Mandela is free. It was 1995 when he came back. After Mandela was freed. And I saw Pele. This was June 2007. Nelson Mandela's 89th birthday, July 1992. We were in Cape Town with the students, and we had class every day. I read the papers in the morning. I saw in the paper they're going to have a game, Africa versus the world. The George Weah, who's now the president of Liberia, was on that team representing Africa from all over Africa versus the greatest football players, soccer players of the world. They're going to be in Cape Town for this 90 minutes for Mandela match on Mandela's 89th birthday. The honorary captain of the Africa team, of the world team rather, Pele. We got to go. So we went and bought tickets. We sitting in the stadium. Here come Pele. Everybody's cheering, stadium packed. He runs into the middle of the field, kicks the ball, and then they start the game. And I said, we got to go. I don't know what y'all doing. Y'all can stand it doing now. We going to because I want to see Pele kick a ball if that's the only thing I get to do. I'm saying, but Pele said, I'm not coming back to South Africa till Mandela's free. Whatever we can say and not say about that brother, about Brother Nascimento, our new ancestor, is that the king of soccer, as he was known, the Black Pearl, he made a point of being black. And when this man wrote this book, The Black Man in Soccer, he says, I'm talking about Pele. He is the black man in soccer. There's many black men in soccer. So whoever comes after him, whoever came before him, Pele gave us that figure. So he just wanted to raise that ancestor's name as we kind of.
Gina in the chat said her dad's best friend played with Pele.
Stop playing.
On the New York Cosmos team. This newbie chat, man.
This is what we talking to see, Prof. That's it. That is no. That's the really actually that's the point we're making. Gina, thank you. See, 2023, if we haven't already started doing it, again, we were talking about this the other night. This is the time to interview all the elders in your family. Kathy Adams has been doing it at Claflin. And she's pointing the way for how we have to do it here in Nubia. God bless these people. And I'll mention some of these books. By the way, Tony Warner, you saw on social media, they were talking about this book, Black History Walks. This isn't a 2022 book, but I'm sure you're going to come in Nubia at some point because he was mentioning it and doing tours. Somebody asked me about Harry and Harriet Moore. And I want to talk about Harry and Harriet Moore, who were blown up at their house on Christmas night in Florida, two school teachers. I've talked about them before, but just a few books from 2022. Of course, my friend Leslie Fenwick's book, Jim Crow Pink Slip, came out this year. We've talked about that one, very important. Here's one that we talked about, and I know you got some beautiful things in store in 2023 with our brother. Of course, you talked about this one, Prof, The Door No Return, Tommy Alexander.
Oh, that's beautiful.
That's our brother, yeah. 2022. That's one of the books, and they're in no particular order. Let me pull a couple more. Of course, I mentioned our sister Miriam McGraham's book on Margaret Walker, The House Where My Soul Lives, The Life of Margaret Walker. Very important. Since I mentioned biographies, I do want to, I thought I had it here. That damn Sonny Rollins biography is no joke, yo. I am loving it. But anyway, Saxophone Colossus. I don't know what I did with it. It's around here somewhere, and I don't need to show it to you. I showed it to you last week. Marilyn Nance's book, of course, Last Day in Lagos, about that Festac 77. The Brazilians, oh, here it is. Yeah. Man, just Saxophone Colossus, Sonny Rollins. Because, Rollins' people are from the Caribbean, but he's raised in New York City. So, his grandmother would take him to the Garvey Hall, to Liberty Hall. He grew up across the street from and going to the Schomburg. Sonny Rollins, who still walks the earth. Sonny Rollins is deeply invested in Africana. A couple of other ones. This is Leo Zelig's excellent book on Walter Rodney. We talked about that when we were reading Rodney and Nubia. We're going to come back to that when we get around framing questions 5 and 6. A revolutionary for our time. Zelig's book, The Life of Walter Rodney. Very important piece. Yeah, this is the pricey book, but I'm just a couple of books. The Palgrave Handbook of African Traditional Religion. This came out this year. I really do love this book. And that actually gives me a chance to mention 2 other books I think are very important that came out from Baba Toyin Falola. Decolonizing African Studies and Decolonizing African Knowledge. Together, these 2 books really help us break out of this notion that any place on the map should frame our identity as African people. We are African people. Nascimento says this. In fact, if I were to pause and go back to Nascimento, I would read from Nascimento's Mixture of Massacre, where he says, wherever we are in the world, we are Africans. And in that book, Mixture of Massacre, he's quoting primarily Africans from the diaspora who are working on this. John Clark, Dr. Ben, so many others. Chance Williams, whose birthday is this month as well. Sheikh Anta Diop, whose birthday is this month in December. He's quoting them. Abdiastos Nascimento from Brazil. This figure who is very important in narrating, but these two books help us really understand that, Decolonizing African Knowledge and Decolonizing African Studies. I'll end with, I have to mention my brother, Hakeem Adi, Afro-Brit. Now I know that that Oz and I told you I already had this. African and Caribbean People in Britain, A History, Hakeem Adi. This is an excellent book. This book just came out. It's almost 700 pages. It is a history of African people and Caribbean people in Britain that doesn't begin in the contemporary era. It begins with the early African presence, then African tutors and stewards. Meaning what? What early African presence? Yeah, before the Europeans. Yeah, you heard. Yes, Hakeem Adi. My man Brian Jones at the New York Public Library. In terms of HBCUs, you want a book to grapple with the question of what HBCUs should be doing, could be doing, and in moments when students and faculty push for that, it's this one right here, The Tuskegee Student Uprising, A History, Brian Jones. I love this book. I actually interviewed Brian Jones. And I would love to hear the conversation between the two you all. He's there in New York, Brian Jones. Thulani Davis has an excellent book called The Emancipation Circuit, Black Activism, Forging a Culture of Freedom. Very important. She talks about the networks. It's really a governance. It's a roadmap through governance. I'm going to work some of this in when we get to framing question 2. What are some of the similarities and differences in practices of self-determination among Africans in the United States and our counterparts throughout the world, particularly the Western Hemisphere and the diaspora? That's framing question 2. We're going to deal with some of the Emancipation Circuit. And here's the last one. This is an exhibition catalog. If you are in Texas, particularly if you're in Houston, I know that Ayanelli went with some of her family to this exhibition catalog, and my sister is I hope she gets a chance to go. This is the exhibition catalog of photographs that Gordon Parks took of Kwame Ture, Stokely Carmichael, and Black Power. This is a rally it was 1966 he was at. Here's a picture on page 89. Who was he with in 1966? Same place. That's Karinga. With Stokely Carmichael. I mean, but he's in here. He's got all kind of pictures of Kwame Ture in here. Many of them. This is one of my favorites though. In Atlanta. SNCC headquarters. This is what we got to do, y'all. Sometimes you just got to sit down at the desk and do the work. And as they said, the Panthers posted there, move on over, or we'll move on over you. It's the whole way. Study Carmichael. Go ahead and parse to that picture. This is a great exhibition catalog. There are a lot more books I can mention, but I won't.
Wow.
And just
and I saw Malcolm, somebody in the chat, I think it was mentioned Malcolm when you were talking about people like Karenga. Maybe Malcolm's maybe Malcolm X is one of those people.
Oh my gosh. Watch this, Prof. Watch this. Watch this.
Okay.
Why do we know Malcolm X? What individual made Malcolm X possible in the way that we know him instead of Malcolm Little? Hood.
Elijah Muhammad.
Elijah Muhammad more influential than Malcolm X. Watch this.
Okay.
No, actually, I'm not going to say that. Consider this. I was thinking about this the other day as I was rewatching season 2 of Godfather of Harlem, getting ready for season 3. Shout out to that whole cast, right? You know, oh, I can hear Death calling my name. Anyway, the whole point. What was the central tension, at least essentially, set aside the politics, and we know, we should know the personal stuff. What was the central philosophical tension between Elijah Muhammad and Malcolm X? What was Elijah Muhammad's goal?
Black
self-determination for sure. Malcolm wanted to use the nation as a political force.
Yes, to change, to be a battering ram against racism and injustice.
No question. And internationally, that definitely makes sense.
He went to the UN. Got all the people like, he brought all of the people together. No
question. But here's the thing, though. Elijah Muhammad say we're not a political organization; we're a religious organization. Our job is to bring the people to Islam. Okay. Fast forward to 2022. Are there Muslims in the United States of America who did not come from other places that didn't come through the Nation of Islam? I'm not talking about still in it, because most of them not in it no more.
No, I can't think of
Me neither.
any.
I'm not talking about the Ahmadiyya movement. I'm not talking about the Africans from the. I'm not, because there are a lot of influences. In fact, there's a book called on Detroit called Detroit and Old Islam, which talks about all those. So you see the influences on Elijah Muhammad or the Muslims who had come here from other places as well. But Elijah Muhammad, in fact, the best single book on this I would think is Michael Gomez, my man Michael Gomez, NYU, his book Black Crescent, where he talks about the Muslims that came on the boats as enslaved, the Muslim movements in the late 19th, earlier century, and he's got a chapter called The Nation. Most of these black people running around here calling themselves Muslim, and this is from somebody who lived in Philly almost 20 years. They Orthodox Muslim now. They Sunni Muslim, they Shia Muslim. But if you tug on them, either they or their parents or now grandparents were in the Nation of Islam. I don't know that you couldn't make a case for Elijah Muhammad. Really?
Okay. All right. Someone in the chat also on the sports tip brought up Jesse Owens.
Sure. You mean in terms of influence?
Yes. Like Pele.
Nah. Because where they doing track and field at? I'm just saying.
I mean, but this is part of the exercise, right? I mean,
actually, yeah, you know what? I would love to see some more about that. Because Jesse Owens, remember, Jesse Owens was treated so badly in this country. And he's a track and field athlete.
Joe Lewis? Before Muhammad? Joe Lewis. I mean, you know, like
there's their case to be made, but the cases are often U.S. centric.
Right.
Right now, the whole world has paused for Pele. But in the United States of America, we still talking about. I mean, really, the death of Pele really shows us just how marginal the United States of America is.
Yes.
Pele is I guarantee you, at Lula da Silva's inauguration in a few hours in Brazil, they're going to stop for Pele. They have to. And that's in Brazil. But they're going to stop for Pele in France. They're going to stop for Pele in Saudi Arabia. Now, Jesse Owens, I'm not sure.
No, you are sure. You know, but this is part of the exercise again. You know, we need to know enough before we start, you know.
Well, that's important. Actually, Charlena, Paul Robeson's tough to beat. I mean, but here's the thing: how do we distinguish? See, yes, you know what, right? We should. You're right, Prof. Jack Johnson, but Robeson overflows the boundaries. There's no, and I see Dr. Delaney here. I'm glad to see my friend Kim Delaney, our friend who is the director of education programs at the DuSable Museum in Chicago. She's talking about, oh, look at this, all these people. There's no clear beginning. Each steps into a tradition. Right. Maybe that's the point. Yeah. Thanks, Doc. Thank you, Dr. D.
And I'm
Garvey. Oh, you know what? I think Garvey beats Pele.
Yes. I mean, but I'm sitting, you know, this past few weeks, you know, coming up with this concept of passing the baton.
Yes.
I want us to understand that we, you know, all of us who are excelling in whatever people that you like, somebody came before them. You know, even when you brought up Malcolm, you can't talk about him without Elijah Muhammad. Nope. You cannot.
And before Elijah Muhammad, without Louise and Earl, his parents, which means Marcus Garvey. So maybe Garvey, because Garvey influenced Elijah Muhammad too. That's right.
Yeah. So I mean, we have to go back and go back and go back, keep going back. We have to keep going back. We can't just start right here.
No, Unknown Soldier, I feel you. He says, my elders don't want to talk, and those who did talk are now ancestors. That is
that's gonna be tough. You know, that part of collecting you know, that generation, they were taught to not talk. You know, that to keep it all inside and to not share. I was just telling somebody the other day, even talking with my mom about things. I think I was talking to you about, share, you know, trying to get things because her, you know, in her mind, the trauma was blocked. So she's not going to ever bring that up. You know, you don't talk about those things, right? No. And so it's a tough thing. But those of us who are right now conscious, start writing your own words. Don't let anybody tell your story.
It looked like Erica did it. Look, Erica says, my 86-year-old great uncle called my mom yesterday, and I took over the conversation with my recorder for 50 minutes talking about life in Florida, Mississippi. He said, yeah, this is what I'm talking about. Right. And for those who don't have it, we have each other. As Aisha Imani used to say, when we started Sankofa Freedom Academy, we met at her house to plan out to get him. Now it's a K-12 school out there. Aisha, we were meeting that first meeting. I'll never forget. We sitting there. And in order to get a charter in Philadelphia, we got to do this state charter. It's the beginning of charter schools in Philly. We don't like charter schools. We want public schools, but public schools are charter schools. And if this is our way to do it, we're gonna do it. We take any tactic. So how do we do this? Who do we know? And Aisha stood up and said, well, we know each other. That settled the whole conversation. And we put that together. So if you don't have elders in your family who want to talk, or if you keep trying, but understand we have each other. Jacob Carruthers said this over and over again. He says, as we worked on something, we're still doing what ASCAP called the African World History Project. Mario Beatty and I are the co-editors of that project. The beginning of African world history are the stories of our families and communities. The story of your family and the story of your community is the most important thing. We don't get to the pyramids except through the families of the people who built them. We don't get to the great achievements. I mean, there's no Pele without his daddy, who was a soccer player, who the boy saw crying, said, don't worry, Pop, I'll win this World Cup for you. And then he did it 3 times. You understand? I mean, we don't get there except our families. So, Prof, that baton is constantly being handed. Look at this. All right, y'all. We're gonna pause. We went over 2 hours. This was a little bit long. That's the other thing. For 2023, we're gonna keep it tighter. We have each other. We have each other. And we have each other. Look at that. There it is. What's tomorrow? Uh-oh, can't hear you, Prof.
Tomorrow is Imani. Today is Kumba. Tomorrow's Imani.
For all the children who parents named them. I didn't name my friend Imani Perry's book. I should mention that. South to America. Birmingham born, raised on the East Coast, West Coast at Princeton University. My good friend Imani Perry. Her name is Imani, like so many other people. So I mean, hey, you can't wipe that up. It's black. Wow. Faith. The faith. In fact, we should end with that while you're showing the candles. Let's just read Imani the way it was written at the beginning of Kwanzaa. To believe with all our heart in our people and the righteousness and victory of our struggle. Love you.
I should love you too. Happy everything, y'all. We'll see you in 2023 on Monday. Office hours. Dr. Carr, have a wonderful, restful, peaceful, joyous day off.
See you next year.
All right. Bye, y'all.